Chapter 1050. If the old man's smile and current state could be sustained for a long time, Luonan's mentality might be more conservative. He might place more of his thoughts in the direction of how to create a similar environment. But that was not the case. Luo Yuandao's stamina and energy were simply not enough to support such a state. After standing alone on the lawn for less than a minute, his body began to sway. Octopus and Nurse Hong rushed over to support him, which directly interfered with the old man's self-logic. He began to struggle, and his emotions began to fluctuate again, becoming irritable. Under Luonan's gaze, the frail structure of the old man's body and soul entered a terrible state of chaos after a short few dozen seconds of peace and harmony. In fact, he was even weaker than before. The lawn also began to become chaotic. Octopus and Nurse Hong tried to put the old man into the wheelchair. The old man continued to struggle. During this time he opened his eyes. His turbid and hazy vision, after drifting for a few degrees, locked onto the thick clouds in the sky. Occasionally he would flip his palms up and try his best to reach upwards. At this moment, no matter how constrained Luonan's thoughts were, he could still understand. The old man's self-logic formed a link with the clouds in the sky, bestowing a certain peculiar value to it. Perhaps this was the moment when the grandfather and grandson were most connected in over a decade? The problem was that this might not lead to a good result. Muffled rolls of thunder clearly rang in the sky, but Luonan's mind escaped during this time. Let's put it this way for the time being. He completed a great switch between Xia City and the Central Pacific Ocean. Due to the shift in focus, the water vapor fake body that had dissipated for a moment on the cruise ship solidified again. Plus, Blood Demon reacted very quickly. His body control ability was astonishing. Even though everyone knew that Luonan's soul had left his body a bit, the awkward situation didn't last too long. And at this time, Zhang Yingying's chain of calls helped Luonan out of his predicament. The signal came from Xia City, and it chased Luonan all the way here. Luo Yui, you've gone too far. The moment the call connected, Zhang Yingying opened her mouth and scolded, "You do whatever you want. It's fine if you don't follow the plan, but why can't you contact me at all when you're looking for someone?" Did I? Luonan's mind was still a bit absent-minded. Zhang Yingying's energetic voice sounded righteous. Didn't your communicator explode? Either the line is busy or you're not picking up. I can't tell that you're quite busy. Except for who else is coming to harass me? Luonan retorted in passing. He absorbed a bit of strength from the other side in passing, allowing his mood to calm down a bit. It was also because of Zhang Yingying's reminder that he also split off a portion of his consciousness and swept it over the North Bank's underground laboratory that was several thousand kilometers away. Luonan's various communication tools were perfectly placed there. They were originally meant to confuse the enemy, but right now they were just serving as a signal relay station. The only advantage was that he could log into a large local area network like the Psychic Wave Network, which had limited coverage without any problems. He could Psychic Network Soul Network, but he was Limited Range Network. Luo Soul Luonan. Luonan sighed. He gradually reduced the hybrid structure of his soul cloak and mica, interfering with the material plane of Xia City. This could be considered as tidying up the mess left behind by his sudden escape. Hopefully, President Ouyang and the others would not work overtime because of this. Aside from this, Luonan also saw Zhang Yingying's so-called exploding phone calls. Actually, there were only 2 or 3 of them. As for the other 2, while she was distracted, Zhang Yingying asked again, "Then Yuan, why have you had enough harassment, or have you been harassed enough?" Zhang Yingying asked, "Are you done harassing or being harassed? Give me a definite message. There's still 4 or 5 hours until the auction starts. Have you arranged any programs?" Programs? Luonan's gaze subconsciously swept across Blood Demon and Wan Liuhua's faces. He had no intention of asking. Even if there were programs, he wouldn't be interested in participating, let alone programs. No, I can't do this. Luonan's mind tightened. He quickly denied his previous state of mind. If he became distracted, lost in thought because of a notebook, then wouldn't he be exposing his weakness to others? In the end, Luonan had learned a few things when it came to interpersonal communication and scheming. Perhaps it was very difficult to do it perfectly. Perhaps it wasn't worth mentioning in the eyes of experts, but he still needed to improve through experience. If he improved a little, then the enemy would misjudge a little. Wouldn't that be the case? Luonan calmed the churning thoughts in his mind once more. He redistributed his consciousness to various spatial directions. He needed to be a bit more in front of people, especially in the jadeite light. It would be best if a situation like Blood Demon's palm smashing into his shoulder blade didn't happen again. Luonan's thoughts flowed. It only took a second or two for Luonan to laugh. I can ask about programs, but I don't have any. I do. Can't I find some fun on such a large ship? Luonan's laughter was abrupt. In truth, it was a bit terrifying. Zhang Yingying was stunned for a moment. She didn't respond immediately. Luonan temporarily stopped this topic. Your line is busy. I'll make another call. Contact me later. Luonan didn't do as Zhang Yingying said and immediately made a call. Instead, he turned to look at the person in the elevator who needed his attention the most. Tugu, the bodyguard-like extraordinary, was still lingering in the elevator. The direct reason for this was the tool that came with him. This person was possessed and controlled by the necromancer. It consumed a lot of energy. Tugu spent quite a bit of effort to give this colleague the strength to stand up. Luonan asked, "Do you want to have afternoon tea together?" Tuji's attitude was still restrained and polite. "It's okay. I took the liberty to disturb you. I hope you can forgive me." He didn't say anything more. He gave Luonan a nod and supported his tool colleague. They walked back into the elevator and left. Luonan only turned his attention back after the elevator closed and went up. Blood Demon slapped Luonan's back again at this time. This time, both the slap and the reception were done quite perfectly. This fellow Tugu isn't simple, right? Yes. He's very strong. He's very organized. Blood Demon was stunned for a moment. He soon laughed. Brother Luo, your comments are quite unique. Luonan laughed. He didn't speak in detail. He thought for a moment, found a number and dialed back. Hello. Sister Pomegranate. He was calling his cousin Emohan. She was also one of the two people who had called just now. Emohan was clearly in class. She picked up quickly and spoke in a low voice. Luonan could still hear the unhappiness in her tone. You're back from playing around? Don't look for me. It's Yuqin looking for you. It looks like it's quite urgent. Luonan immediately understood. Yuqin's call must have gone unanswered. She was worried that Luonan wasn't picking up on purpose, so she asked for Emohan's help. Aside from being urgent, this method of doing things was excessively careful. It showed that Yuqin held more reverence towards Luonan. However, there were certainly many twists and turns involved to be able to force Yuqin to this point. Luonan didn't hope to understand everything in an instant. He also didn't want to waste his brain. He gave Emohan a few vague grunts and hung up the phone. Luonan thought of an old acquaintance of Xia City who he had met on the same cruise ship not too long ago. That person was Yuqin's father. What was his name again? Chapter 1051. Luonan wanted to immediately call Yuqin, but he turned to glance at Blood Demon and the others. They were still waiting idly by the elevator. His mind stirred and he nodded in that direction. My classmate is looking for me. It's probably a bit of a private matter. He paused here and said, Actually, you two don't need to keep me company. Isn't Tucker and Dr. Bai always following me? Bai Xinyan was fine, but Tucker's eyes were wide open. His words were stuck in his throat. Why am I always following you? Tucker's expression was rich, but the problem was that no one paid attention to him. Blood Demon and Wan Luhua looked at each other. We're being ignored. Okay, this is a joke. In fact, they could feel that Luonan's words were unclear, but they were exceptionally clear about his purpose. It seemed that this fellow wanted to do something. The kind that would look for trouble. Yes, they could see that Luonan was still young. Perhaps he felt that it wasn't good to lose face in the face of complicated interpersonal relationships, or perhaps he instinctively rejected the tyrannical behavior of bullying the weak. In short, the two extraordinaries who could suppress the vast majority of variables had become burdens. The two extraordinaries were unable to fully understand Luonan's mental journey for a while. However, they were all intelligent people, so they didn't need to speak too bluntly. A large part of the reason why they kept following Luonan was because they were worried that Luonan would directly clash with the extraordinaries on the Jadeite lightship. It might even escalate, adding variables to their future plans. Right now, the most troublesome few people had either directly or indirectly met face to face. The possibility of a direct conflict or a violent conflict was already very small. Luonan's current state had absolutely no problems with his personal safety. That's fine. I need to go take care of some things. Wan Luhua had been called over by Blood Demon at the last minute. As a high-level member of the Eye of Secret Deeds, there were quite a few matters that needed to be taken care of before entering this huge maelstrom. Wan Luhua did things in a straightforward manner. Since she had spoken, she didn't stay any longer. She entered the elevator, turned around and smiled at Luonan. "Call me anytime if you need anything." Luonan bowed in thanks. Seeing the elevator door close, Blood Demon impatiently clicked his tongue twice. "Your luck with women is quite good. Don't look at this master style smiling all the way here. He's usually a fierce character." Luonan ignored these senseless words. He just asked, "What about you, Mr. Blood Demon? What are your plans?" Blood Demon, who was despised again, was still smiling happily. "Actually, I hired you to be my artist today. I didn't expect that we would get along so well, and many of the drawings went beyond the scope." Some words came out of the Blood Demon's mouth, but the meaning was the same. "I originally wanted to bring you to experience a few small circles, but since you have your own ideas, I can't force you. Since I've already said it, I have to do something about it. How about this? I'll make the arrangements and see if I can find a few who don't look so repulsive. I'll call you later." "Okay." Luonan answered in a straightforward manner. "Why isn't there any sincerity? Didn't you agree? This is a bad omen." The Blood Demon chuckled and said no more. Without using the elevator, he turned around and left with a smile on his face. In this way, only Luonan, Tucker, and Baisinyan were left in the elevator. From the beginning to the end, no one asked for their opinion. Baisinyan was calm and collected. In comparison, Tucker was a little impatient. Yes, perhaps it was because he had lost 2 nemesis characters in a row, but he was finally able to breathe. His courage grew when he was angry. After hesitating for a moment, Tucker finally asked the question. "Roro, what do you want me to do?" He emphasized the word, "I," and blurred out the words Uncle Luo at the same time. Luonan didn't mind. He just laughed. "Be a bodyguard." "Since when am I a bodyguard?" "Aren't you? Then let's be clear about it." Tucker was speechless for a time. Clearly, Luonan wasn't going to reason with him. He could only blame Blood Demon for his terrible demonstration. Luonan really did have a plan for using Tucker. He had a plan on the plane, forming a basic train of thought. It was just that the details were not clear. The main thing was that Luonan's previous experience might not be useful. In any case, there were still a few hours left. This fellow looked like he had rough skin and thick flesh. He should be able to endure being tossed around. Luonan had a plan in mind, so he no longer paid attention to Tucker. He had to take care of some miscellaneous matters before doing proper business. He activated his wristband from several thousand kilometers away and contacted Yuqin. The call was answered in an instant. "Mr. Luo." They were classmates and alumni. This form of address was far too polite. It was a deformed beginning. It was hard to avoid awkwardness later on. Yuqin wanted peace of mind. Fortunately, they were gradually getting used to it. "My father asked for your number just now, Mr. Luo." I didn't tell him directly. Yuqin's words were polite, but she went straight to the point. She really wasn't in the mood to engage in small talk. "I think that he might have encountered some trouble. His mind is uneasy. Otherwise, he would have remembered that he contacted you through me at the end of last year." "Oh, something like that happened." Luonan nodded. He remembered this detail as well. At the same time, he felt that the nickname xianxia that the doll gave Yuqin couldn't be more appropriate. She always had an intelligent and calm personality. "My father is currently on the Jadeite light. He said that he saw you not too long ago." "Yes, that's right." Yuqin didn't ask why Luonan was there. Of course, she didn't say that Emohan still believed that Luonan was still in closed-door training in Xia City's laboratory. She just asked politely and carefully, "My father definitely needs help, but that place isn't like Xia City. Mr. Luo, can I give him your number?" "Sure." Since Luonan had returned the call, he had made preparations in this regard. He agreed quite straightforwardly. Yuqin considered things a bit more. When asking for help, she needed to explain the sequence of events as clearly as possible. Only then would she not be embarrassed and even cause misunderstandings. She carefully considered her words and did her best to tell Luonan everything she knew. "My father and my brother are together. They are here to treat the problem of an infection." Yuqin's tongue was nimble. She explained the sequence of events clearly with just a few words. Of course, there were some details that she couldn't grasp. Luonan didn't mind because he had already grasped the keywords. Clay's laboratory. Luonan's gaze turned to Baisinyan. She could be considered half the main character. He grinned and comforted Yuqin. "I understand. You don't need to worry. I will understand the specifics of the situation from Uncle. Okay. Otherwise, you can give me Uncle's number." "It's the same." Luonan's attitude was very polite. He didn't deliberately put on airs. Yuqin clearly let out a breath of relief. She said that she would immediately transfer Luo Nan's number to her father and let him get in touch with Luo Nan. The call ended quickly and efficiently. Luo Nan quite approved of the other side's attitude. He thought about how he would have to call in a bit, so he simply stopped in the elevator and turned his gaze to Bai Xinyan. "What kind of demonic moth are you guys up to now?" Bai Xinyan looked a bit surprised. "You're talking about Yu Qi's son, right? That young man is in Team C. He's a different kind of VIP. No matter how much the laboratory tosses and turns, it wouldn't cause trouble for its future customer." Luo Nan coughed. "Start from the beginning." He looked at Bai Xinyan up and down. "I found it strange just now. Yu Qin's brother, his name is Yu Zheng, right? He was infected in Xia City. How did he hook up with you guys across the Pacific Ocean?" "Oh, the course of the disease isn't right. He was infected at the beginning of the year. It's been almost half a year. If he hasn't been cured by now, then he should be in the severe third stage." Bai Xinyan pursed her lips into a smile. "This involves a few problems on the research and technical level. Can you be a bit more direct?" Luo Nan's lips twitched. The water vapor body reflected his thoughts, and he subconsciously moved his fingers. His thumb and index finger unfolded one after the other. His middle finger was about to come out. It looked like it was going to be the third time soon. It was unknown whether or not Bai Xinyan understood Luo Nan's hand gestures. In any case, she did explain a bit more. "Mr. Luo, perhaps you're paying more attention to the auction for this event organized on the Jadeite Light. But the essence of the event is actually an exhibition and an exchange meeting concerning the research and application of distortion technology. Or perhaps it's a trade fair for the results of distortion research in recent years. Among them, the controllable distortion technology is one of the most eye-catching ones." Luo Nan's fingers paused. "Controllable distortion? That's right. It's using the dangerous external stimulation of distortion infection to find one or even several subversive human evolutionary paths. To put it simply, through this experiment, a new path can be opened between ordinary people and ability users. It's independent of the two existing paths of self-awakening and burner transformation." Bai Xinyan spoke with fervor and assurance. She spoke of everything she knew without holding back. She spoke without reserve. Admittedly, she spoke in a straightforward manner, but her contents possessed a shocking power. In the end, Luo Nan still extended his middle finger. His 3 fingers remained there, but his meaning had already changed completely. A third path. At least that's what the presentation said. It's the product of multiple technological collaborations. LCRF, Xianxia, Deep Blue, and a few private laboratories have all joined in. They've all achieved certain results. And Dr. Clay, my mentor, presides over the laboratory. He's the demonstrator of this technological achievement. The goal of doing this is to explore its value a step further. Right now is the time to expand its influence within a certain range and find even more supporters." Luo Nan raised his eyebrows. And at this moment, a communication wave activated the wristband of Gear's underground laboratory far away on the north bank. This call was within his expectations, but Luo Nan was surprised when he noticed the caller. "Hello, student Yuqin?" "Mr. Luo." Yuqin's enunciation was as clear as before, but compared to a few minutes ago, the speed of her speech was clearly faster. Her choice of words was less particular, and her final words were a bit shaky. "Mr. Luo, I can't contact my father." "Ha! There's also Yu Zheng. There's also Uncle Lu. There's also Secretary Zheng. They aren't picking up the phone." Chapter 1052. Yu Zheng sat ramrod straight. He was even more upright than he was in class. It wasn't that he wanted to sit like this, but the metal ring on his neck was constantly releasing a weak electric current that paralyzed the central nervous system. It made him unable to muster the slightest bit of strength from head to toe. He was in whatever position the others were in. He felt more like a patient with high paraplegia who was placed in a wheelchair with the other 2 members of Team C. He was controlled by the men in black suits behind and beside him as they walked through the long corridor and entered this unfamiliar room. Then he saw the people in groups A and B and saw that they were similarly paralyzed. He also saw the catheters extending from their bodies and the blood flowing through them. A whining sound rang in his ears. It came from the 2 fellow sufferers and perhaps also from himself. The situation didn't change according to Yu Zheng's will. The guys in groups A and B before him were treated a bit better than them. At least they had sofas and carpeted floor to lie on. They could only sit in wheelchairs and lean against the wall, shoulder to shoulder. Their hands and feet trembled as they waited for misfortune to descend. Yu Zheng didn't know what was going on at all. In the beginning, he didn't know who had ordered these expressionless men in black suits to suddenly attack them, knock down old Lu, take away their communication equipment and bring him here alone. Now that he entered this suite, he saw the floating mass of flesh that seemed to be slightly wriggling. He also saw the catheters, blood donors and equipment. He also saw the middle-aged white man who was half lying on the bed and receiving a blood transfusion. He had an answer to the previous series of questions. But he still didn't know where this guy came from. It was an extremely terrible situation. There was a serious information imbalance. Yu Zheng's thoughts could only move towards endless imagination. In the past few minutes, he had considered at least a dozen possibilities that could be used as suspense or horror. But in the end, everything turned into a meaningless turbid current of emotions. They wantonly squeezed his heart, stirred his brain, and turned his entire body into a continuously heated pressure cooker. His eyeballs were almost squeezed out of their sockets. Yu Zheng struggled with all his might, but the electric ring on his neck just happened to control him. It reduced his efforts time and time again, intensifying his despair. Finally, after a powerful wave of emotions overflowed, Yu Zheng's state inevitably fell into a trough. His mind was in a trance and his expression was blank. He looked at the black suits and some medical staff bustling around the room, adjusting the catheters and adjusting the instruments. He did not know how to react. Finally, there was only one thought in his mind: how did he end up in this situation? He vaguely remembered that just 10 minutes ago, as a human experimental subject who could be lying on the operating table at any time, he was a little nervous about facing the unknown, but he was not as anxious as his father. In fact, he was even a little eager. Thinking further, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was full of ambition. In his opinion, being a lab rat was nothing. All he needed was the ability to bite open the cage. That's what he said, that's what he really thought. But in the current situation, was there something wrong? The script of his life shouldn't be like this. When did I go astray? Yu Zheng's mental state was no longer able to support continuous thought. Very quickly, a few beautiful faces of the opposite sex that he had an intimate relationship with and had participated in many sports with flashed through his mind. It was during that event that he became a mutated infected person. No, that's not right. Yu Zheng's thoughts flickered once more, and the face of a beautiful woman appeared faintly in his mind. She seemed to be called, what was her name again? He really couldn't remember, but the appearance of another male youth that appeared soon after became exceptionally deep and clear. Luonan. Right, it was because of that beautiful woman that he and Luonan became enemies. Things became awkward from then on. Even though he was infected later on, it was to a large extent because he entered the circle of unfriendly people with Luonan. During this period, more and more information about Luonan came to his family. Though Yu Qin and his father intentionally hid it from him, did they really think he was stupid? Even if he was really stupid, a few things were strung together after he came into contact with Clay's laboratory. Yu Zheng had to admit that he was very irritated when he heard the name Luonan. He really hated it, but there were a few other elements that were closer to the category of envy, jealousy, and hatred. Yu Qin often bragged to his father behind his back about how amazing this kid was and what abilities he possessed. Later on, he came into contact with Clay's laboratory and heard about the corresponding group. But basically, most of it was just hearsay. At the very least, Yu Zheng didn't feel it too much. After all, he had only fought with Luonan once in a virtual game. What he saw and heard afterward were all about Luonan's powerful connections and his inexplicable high social status. Through his deliberate understanding and partial imagination, the relevant concepts could only be manifested in a way that he could understand. Look, that kid who hasn't even shed his fetal hair has a so-called supernatural ability. Beauties immediately fall in love with him. He can call the wind and summon the rain, and he can act unscrupulously. If only I could do this. This was the greatest driving force that pushed Yu Zheng to participate in this experiment. But how did things turn out like this today? If Luonan can do it, why can't I do it? How did he do it? What should I do? His chaotic thoughts set off a turbulent flow of emotions once again. Under the effect of the large amounts of hormones secreted by the human body, Yu Zheng's heartbeat grew faster and faster. He unconsciously began to take large breaths and his vision grew blurry. It was as if that petite and tender youth was standing in front of him. He just stood there without any expression, but that spot clearly sparkled with light. On the other hand, Yu Zheng's side was a sheet of darkness. The boundary between light and darkness wasn't clear. It was as if he could touch it just by extending his hand and stretching his neck. Yu Zheng subconsciously wanted to do this. He believed that he had done it because there was a change in his body, but in reality someone had pinched his chin and moved it back and forth a few times. Yu Zheng did his best to open his eyes wide, but his severely limited control over his body made it so that he could only see the black suit in front of him. He couldn't even see the person's face clearly. Instructor Wang? The state of C2 is unstable. Is that so? Then, let's put it aside for now. A knock came from the door before Instructor Wang could answer. The room was quiet, and Yu Zheng's thoughts began to return to normal. Perhaps he was stimulated by the words "put it aside for now." He subconsciously received and analyzed the information from the outside world, and he heard Instructor Wang say, "Please come in." The voice wasn't loud, but it felt like it couldn't leave the bedroom. But the door to the outer room opened in the next moment. Someone walked in after the sound of messy footsteps. Instructor Wang called out to them. "Mr. Tuesday," another voice came from behind Instructor Wang. It was probably the main character on the bed. His tone was quite polite. "Mr. Tu, you've worked hard to make a trip here." "Yes, I saw that this colleague's condition isn't too good. Send him back." This matter was clearly not important. Mr. Tu spoke a few sentences and changed the topic. "But this one, is he about to awaken?" Another person answered, "C2 was infected on New Year's Eve last year. It's a body fluid infection, and the infection duration is the longest. The laboratory has always been under good control, but since it's Group C it might not be as stable as Group A and Group B. HM awaken?" Instructor Wang's voice sounded again. 3 transformations or awakening? Are they talking about me? Awakening? Yu Zheng listened, not really understanding. But the rapid heartbeat and the burning sensation of his body slowly faded. The phantom of Luonan was no longer in front of him. Next, he went through a messy round of tests and judgments. It wasn't easy for him to slow down, but he heard Mr. Tu's slightly raised tone. "Stopped?" Just as he finished speaking, there was another knock on the door. Chapter 1053. At the door of the suite, Taker's calves were twitching as he looked at the still closed door. The thick wooden door could not block out the 2 cold and tyrannical auras in the room. He could be considered a strong person in the physical body, but there was still a qualitative difference between him and the 2 in the room. After all, that was an extraordinary. Taker's brain was quite useful, but he could not understand it all. How did Luonan find this place? Was he really helping a classmate? Please, this reason. Taker was speechless. On the other side, Bai Xinyan looked calm. Perhaps it was because she had been in charge of contacting the relevant parties and trying to communicate with them first, so she had no time to be nervous? T. Taker would rather take over her task. After all, it was destined to be useless. Moreover, he could take the opportunity to spread some news. It was not that Taker did not have such an opportunity on his way here, but he did not have the guts to do so. Luonan, who had been flipping through the notebook all along the way, inexplicably gave him an enormous pressure. It was as if there was an incorporeal demonic eye that could see through his internal organs, his mind, and his thoughts. Perhaps Luonan was even devising a plan to kill him? Even if it was a misconception, Taker didn't have the guts to test it with his own life. He had been letting his imagination run wild for quite a while. It had been at least 10 seconds since he had knocked on the door, but there was no response from the other side. This was normal. He could sense the situation behind the door, so naturally the other side would not ignore the abnormalities outside. Maintaining silence was already a kind of attitude. Taker hoped that things would end here. He hoped that everyone would have a tacit understanding to give each other some face and never cross the door in front of him. The problem was that the development of the situation was destined to not go as he wished. Luonan flipped to the last page of the notebook in his hands once more. Then he closed the notebook and let out a light breath. He spoke very calmly. Maybe he didn't hear it. Knock again. Taker felt his scalp tingle as he listened. His heart was filled with unwillingness, but his arm was completely out of his control. He obediently reached out and pressed the doorbell. There was still no response from the other side of the door. It was also at this time that Taker saw Luonan reach out his hand to the side. Of course, Luonan wasn't knocking on the door. Instead, he made a casual grabbing motion. A cloud of mist seemed to splash into the air. A pitch-black suitcase was pulled out from the mist by Luonan. "Give me a hand." Taker's brain still wasn't working. He just followed Luonan's instructions. He stupidly reached out his hand and used it as a platform, allowing Luonan to place the suitcase in his hand. The chest was opened by Luonan. Taker did not know what was inside, nor did he dare to look in detail. She just watched as Luonan placed the notebook inside and took out a pen-like object from the center. There was also a square-cut piece of cloth and the like. Soon the box was closed. In the very next second, Taker's palm was moist and moist, almost as though a stream of water was running through his palm. It was incredibly refreshing, and most importantly, the box sank right into his palm, vanishing without a trace. Magic? Spells? Taker was a knowledgeable person, so he wouldn't make a big fuss over nothing. But the problem was that he could clearly feel that from the beginning to the end, the vital energy in his body was smooth and without any ripples, and it didn't cause any disturbance. Moreover, this wasn't under his control. It was Luonan. It was this young man before his eyes. Luonan had groomed him in a refreshing manner. There was no need for Luonan to use his spells. Taker's palm was damp. There was no doubt that he was a tool through and through in Luonan's hands. As for how Luonan did it, Taker no longer had the courage to think deeply about it. Open the door. Luonan's command had completely replaced Taker's thoughts. He simply didn't think too much about it. He just opened the locked door without much effort. Luonan didn't pass on this responsibility. He walked straight in. Taker's mind was still in a blank state as he followed behind Luonan. Xuanhuan was at the very back. Just as they entered the door, a series of metallic mechanical sounds rang out in front of them. All the men in black suits in the living room had pulled out their guns. They aimed uniformly at Taker. They were clearly in a state of waiting to fire. There was even a person in the middle who yelled loudly, "This is a private room. Get out immediately." Taker's mind finally cleared up a bit under the focus of the lethal weapons. But he didn't care about these words. The matter was clear. Given the nature of these people, if a different group of people were to come in this way, no, they might not even be able to come in before they would be turned into a beehive by the bullets that shot through the door. It was precisely because of these words that the other party knew of the special nature of this place. Knowing is fear and fear is understanding. It's true that everyone here is a tool. The group of men in black suits had sunglasses covering their faces, but it couldn't hide the beads of sweat that slid down their foreheads. Their heavy breathing exposed their unease and fear early on. Luonan didn't pay attention to this. It was as if he didn't see the pitch-black muzzles in front of him. He looked around very naturally. "Mr. Black Lion was here just now, right? He returned the notebook that my family had left outside to its rightful owner. That's why he came to express his thanks. This lousy reason." No one answered him. Luonan's gaze quickly locked onto the man in the worst condition among the group of men in black suits. It was tool number 1 who had returned from the mission of returning the notebook. Luonan nodded and answered his own question. "It looks like this is the right place." Luonan didn't stop as he spoke. He walked straight into the bedroom. This was too much. The men in black suits who had gone through strict training instinctively wanted to pull the trigger. But a concise command came from inside at this time. "Withdraw." It was as if the men in black suits had been pardoned. They withdrew their guns one after another, but they still blocked Luonan's path forward. The problem was, what was the point of that? Luonan had made up his mind long ago. He completely ignored the obstacles in front of him. Actually, this couldn't be considered an obstacle for his water vapor body. His footsteps didn't stop. He went straight forward and made contact with the wall of men in black suits in the blink of an eye. The latter didn't have any effect in blocking Luonan. Luonan's water vapor body was illusory. It was as if it came from another world. The two sides didn't intersect. It just passed right through. "Halt." The man who had just given the order spoke once more. What was faster than his voice was the air that suddenly solidified like an iron wall. At this moment, the flow of air in the living room of the suite seemed to have completely frozen. Everyone's breath didn't even pass through their noses and mouths. Even Taker, who had a fleshly body, felt his skin tighten. The breath of his entire body suddenly turned muddy, and the flow of his blood and energy wasn't smooth. He subconsciously took a step back and took a defensive stance. He nearly bumped into Xuanhuan. When he looked forward again, he saw the two men in black suits blocking the bedroom door. They were like a door that had been forcefully opened. An indescribably strange sound separated them. Their bodies were stiff and they lost all consciousness. Luonan, who had just passed through with his illusory water vapor body, appeared in a position near the back of the center of the door. His fake body was clearly sluggish, and there seemed to be faint wisps of water vapor emitting from it. In the next moment, his entire body distorted and collapsed. Behind him was a young man dressed like a bodyguard in a black suit, but his skin was a bit strange and gray. "Instructor?" "Wang Yong." Taker called out instinctively, but Wang Yong ignored him. Instead, he turned his head. At the same time, Luonan's calm voice came from inside the bedroom. As expected, Mr. Two is also here. Actually, I forgot to say something just now. You don't mind taking up a bit of your time, right? Oh, this scene is truly extravagant. Chapter 1054. The situation before him made Tucker want to die. No, he absolutely didn't want to die. But in the current situation, there was a high probability that he would be killed here as a fish in the pond. Tucker knew who Wang Yong was. He was an extraordinaire who had been nurtured by a certain someone with all their might. He seemed to be the only one under the name of the LCRF. This person was very young, probably in his early 30s. Even if he was repeatedly questioned because of his independence and personal ownership, an extraordinary was an extraordinary. It was not Tucker's place to comment. If he really got angry, he wouldn't be able to do anything to the person in question. If he wanted to vent his anger on someone else, whoever stood in front of him would be the unlucky one. Wang Yong's skin color was already strange, and now it was even uglier. Tucker wanted to hide his body, but even though there were many muscular men in the suite, his body was the most conspicuous one. The thoughts in his mind could only be considered as wishful thinking. Fortunately, when Instructor Wang Yong saw that his line of defense had been broken through for no reason, he was stunned for a moment. Without even looking at Tucker and Bai Xinyan, he quickly turned around and rushed into the bedroom. In any case, the two of them wouldn't make any further moves. Indeed, Tucker and Bai Xinyan were very well behaved. They stood where they were and exchanged glances with the black suits in the room, showing their respect to each other. At this time, Luonan's line of sight had just finished cruising through the blood donors, the catheter network, the blood transfusion receptors, the relevant hubs, and the refining apparatus that filled the bedroom. In the end, he turned to 2G's face and said, 2 or 3 extraordinaries circling around. Meaningless consumption and waste. This must be the legendary money ability. Luonan could see, at least from the perspective of others, that the situation in this bedroom was just a topic of conversation between Luonan and others. However, Tugu was not very cooperative. He maintained a calm attitude and remained silent. Luonan opened his mouth and the rest was very calm. He raised the brush and cloth in his hand and waved them in front of 2G's eyes. Earlier, I promised Mr. Blood Demon that I would draw a batch of portraits of extraordinaries for his magazine. Of course, the other techniques are too time-consuming. I'm prepared to give him a sketch. I hope he can accept it. I've tentatively decided on 13, but the problem is that the total number of extraordinaries I've seen might not be that many. It must be a lie. Tucker could not help but curl his lips when Ronan's voice reached the living room. Why is it that almost all of the news I've heard about you is about opposing extraordinaries? The other people in the room weren't interested in tangling with these details. Wang Yong, who entered the room after Luonan, fixed his gaze on the object in Luonan's hand. If Luonan relied purely on the semi-incorporeal quality of his water vapor body to pass through the living room's defense line, Wang Yong would have accepted it. But there was a problem. Luonan was holding a real object in his hand, so the penetration just now was completely unreasonable. To be more precise, it was beyond common sense. Wang Yong thought of a possibility. A spatial fault? Distortion? A space-time domain technique? That was what he thought and asked. Excuse me. Luonan turned around to look at him. He greeted him with a smile. This is Instructor Wang Yong? This is the first time we've met. Sorry for being presumptuous just now. Let me ask, are you interested in participating? Seeing that the bedroom was about to descend into an even more awkward atmosphere, Old Els, who was still half sitting and half lying on the bed, coughed softly twice. He was very restrained, but it was enough for the people involved to understand what he meant. Wang Yong's face was cold as he gestured with his hand. Mr. Luonan, there's a patient here. If there's nothing else, please leave. Does that mean you agree? At Luonan's age, once he began to pester endlessly, his temperament really did match. Tugu and Wang Yong weren't people who were good at talking. Their skill at feigning civility and sincerity wasn't maxed out. Normally it would have been fine. The power of extraordinaries could crush most obstacles. But they just had to encounter Luonan right now. And the situation was super complicated. The leaders of both sides of the conflict didn't have any intentions of directly talking to each other. It was impossible to guess Luonan's thoughts for now. But Old Els was clearly angry. Someone had directly barged into the bedroom and was deliberately ignored. Anyone would be angry in such a situation. For Old Els to be able to maintain his composure was already first-rate shrewdness. Half a second passed before Wang Yong replied stiffly, "This can be discussed later. Right now he's being treated." Treated who? blood transfusions or blood donors? Luonan looked around once more at this exceptionally narrow bedroom that could already fit over 10 people. 9 blood donors and backup and 1 recipient. In his eyes, there were no secrets to speak of. If it's blood donors, then although these people can't walk properly, their central nervous systems have been disturbed by external instruments. They'll be fine once they've been dismantled. If it's said that they've been infected by a mutation, then they're all in the second stage right now. Even if their states are unstable, they can still be saved after a bit of tossing and turning. As for this, Luonan's gaze stopped on Wang Yong's face. He used his thumb to poke to the side, making it clear what he was referring to. His problem doesn't lie in his seemingly pure clone body. It doesn't lie in the mechanical backup of his soul information. Instead, it lies in his utterly terrible initial structural design. He hasn't sat properly since he was in the womb. Yes, whether or not he was born alive is still unknown. What's the point of tossing and turning? Luonan's words were thrown in Wang Yong's face. Wang Yong subconsciously swept a glance to the side of the bed, then he quickly shifted his gaze to stare at Luonan. Mr. Luo, the patient is in front of you. Please be careful with your words. Patient? This isn't a treatment. It's a life extension. That's not right either. Luonan endlessly defined and changed his words. At the same time, he let the special paintbrush spin between his fingers. It was the standard frivolous behavior of a youth, but anyone who had a deeper understanding of him could see that there was an element of malice within. In my opinion, this isn't a treatment. It isn't a life extension either. It's more like an investment. And it's not an investment in industry. It's a venture investment. There are some areas where investments are necessary, but self-righteous investments that waste resources can only be called extravagant and wasteful. Stopping losses early is the most appropriate thing to do. Of course, I'm not familiar with this line of work. I'm just borrowing it to make an analogy. Old Els coughed once more on the bed. This time, he simply cleared his throat and then spoke. I'm familiar with the field of venture investment. Perhaps we can help each other out. No matter who looked at it, this was Old Els taking the initiative to release an act of goodwill. It was for the sake of breaking the deadlock of mutual disregard and entering a normal mode of communication. But this required Luonan's cooperation. Luonan really did stop spinning the paintbrush. He used 3 fingers to pinch the bottom of the paintbrush, exposing the jade white brush shaft to everyone's line of sight. This included Luonan himself. He stared very intently at the paintbrush. He was talking about another matter. Lifespan is probably the most conspicuous indicator of a leap in the hierarchy of life. It is probably one of the most popular directions. Someone once said to me, laying down laws is like a pass. Piling up corpses is like a mountain. In order to surpass the limits and obtain the tinder, sacrifices are inevitable. But if we just sit on a mountain of flesh and corpses and watch others sacrifice themselves, then we casually toss out a few melons and dates and call it venture investment, then there's no meaning to it. There's an ancient saying, one man holds the pass against 10,000 enemies. I don't want to give the authority to open up the limits of the human race to the hands of this person. Mr. Tugu, what do you think? Chapter 1055. 2G's face was expressionless. His sunglasses covered his eyes, and he did not open his mouth to speak. This caused the atmosphere in the bedroom to fall into an extremely awkward state. On the bed, Old El's eyelids drooped down. His face was as heavy as water. He did not look at Luonan again, but Luonan's image had already been outlined in his mind. It was just that it was not clear. This was because he still did not understand what Luonan's goal was in charging into this place. Taking the initiative to attack in a disadvantageous situation, to advance as a retreat? This was very logical. Old matters. Resentment and revenge? Could be related to this. Or perhaps it was purely out of righteous indignation. Though this was laughable, it was not impossible at this age. Though he was lying on the bed, he still received some relevant information. If there was enough time and the atmosphere was suitable, Old Els was confident that he could unravel the cocoon. Unfortunately, this young man was close at hand right now, and his actions showed off his abilities. It was not that Old Els had never experienced this sort of thing in his rich life. Of course, he knew that the most reasonable method right now was to take a step back. At the very least, there was no need for Li Wei, Wang Yu, Abner, and the others to bear the brunt of this. And indeed he had done so. The problem was that the young man was pressing him step by step. Therefore, this was not an exchange or negotiation at all. It was a warning of death with a gun barrel pressed against his forehead. This young man really had the intent to kill stirred. Right now, he was more and more convinced that Luonan really was acting out of that laughable righteous indignation. Old L's eyelids lifted up slightly, and he quickly glanced at Wang Yong beside him. This was the assurance of consulting a professional. Wang Yong muttered to himself for a moment before nodding. Old L's understood. His eyelids closed once more and he let out a long sigh. I'm tired. This was tantamount to giving an order. Wang Yong responded by extending his hand towards Luonan once more. He gestured outwards, but Luonan nodded before Wang Yong could speak. Everyone's tired. It must be said that this was the first time Luonan responded to L's words since he entered the room. His true intentions were revealed. Everyone should go wherever they need to go. What's the point of staying here and wasting resources? Tucker, come over and move people. Also, can you help out here? As the voice traveled outside, Tucker felt a chill from his scalp all the way down to his entire head, chest, spine and legs. However, there seemed to be an invisible rope in the air that was holding his neck and even hooked onto his shoulder blades and tendons all over his body. Like a puppet being controlled, it pulled him forward. At this time, Old Els finally laughed out loud. When he saw that Luonan was about to sweep the room clean of blood donors, he felt that his boots had finally landed on the ground. His heart actually felt a bit carefree. Mr. Luonan, these are specially arranged treatment equipment. It's best to listen to the opinions of professionals before dismantling and installing them, okay? Professional? Are you as good as me? For a moment, the people in the room were speechless. It was not easy for him to connect the sharp young face in front of him with the concept of an expert. Yes, isn't he a professional? In the past, Luonan was fully deserving of being a master of the mental side theory of the inner world. Not to mention the live broadcast that shook the entire world on the beach of T-City. Luonan had clearly established a domain of authority in the field of life configuration. Perhaps every major laboratory and scientific research organization in the world was still engaged in intense debates over Luonan's demonstration of segmentation, superconfiguration theory, and demonstration. However, anyone who wanted to question him would have to step over the sand monster that was created out of thin air and give a sufficiently incisive and fatal explanation. Perhaps there would be such a thing in the future, but right now Wang Yong could only forcefully block them with his stiff arm. Mr. Luonan, please leave immediately. I'm going to leave, but how? Luonan revealed a smile towards Wang Yong. Wang Yong's heart suddenly became alarmed. He completely relied on his instinctive reactions to mobilize the blood energy of his entire body. He instantly broke through the limits of the material body, shook the atmosphere, and rushed back to the abyssal region from the material plane. In the blink of an eye, the flow of air in the entire bedroom and even the wider area was completely under Wang Yong's control. A muffled howl rang out in the room, but it was soon cut off. Only the frequency of the high-speed vibrations of the air could be heard. It faintly resonated with the distant turbulence of the abyssal region. It lashed at people's bodies and minds, bringing about a suffocating pressure. Under the effects of the power of an extraordinary, the abyssal region and the material plane were truly separated by a paper-thin barrier. The mental side could borrow the power of the abyssal region to attack the material plane, while the fleshly side could exert reverse interference, destruction, and even deep utilization. This sort of unyielding and skillful mutual interference and mutual achievement was something that the fleshly side and below could not hope to achieve. The confrontation between the fleshly side and the mental side, especially at the level of extraordinary, required that the power not be released lightly. If it was released, it would hit. It was necessary to actively disrupt and destroy the power transmission model and route of the mental side. Of course, nothing could be better than to directly destroy the frame of the enemy's body and soul and deliver a fatal strike. Wang Yong knew very well that Luonan's real body was not present in this situation. What was presented was merely a kiting thought, a long-range projection of soul strength. Luonan should not even dream of a fatal strike. However, this kiting projectile technique might appear to be extremely ingenious in its application, but it was destined to not possess high-intensity and long-term combat capabilities. Luonan was taking it for granted if he wanted to shake the area overseen by two extraordinaries. Wang Yong was confident that he could destroy Tu Gu in an instant in a direct confrontation. Not to mention that his and Tu Ji's abilities came from the same source. They could mutually complement each other, realizing the effect of 1 + 1 is far greater than 2. What Wang Yong paid the most attention to right now was still Luonan's mysterious and unfathomable space-time domain technique. No matter what level one was at, this was one of the most headache-inducing extraordinary abilities. This was because it deviated far too much from common sense. It was very easy to create unpredictable variables. Wang Yong immediately made his move. 80% of his mental strength was used to perceive the surrounding environment, and he exerted his strength to form a powerful interference against this area. This was all for the sake of quickly capturing traces of Luo Nan's operation in the relevant domain, locking onto the source, and destroying the critical power structure in one fell swoop. He needed to end this battle quickly. Old L's state could not withstand being tossed about. For some reason, Blood Demon and Wan Luhua did not follow along. They could appear at any time. He needed to take advantage of the fact that the two extraordinaries on his side occupied an absolute advantage in terms of hard power. He needed to use the peerless defense of Tugu to back him up. He needed to eliminate the danger in one fell swoop while it was still in its budding state. As for how to deal with the aftermath, there were naturally more professional people who would worry about it. Wang Yong was a meticulous person. And because of his professional habits, he thought very far and very comprehensively. His judgment was indeed quite on the level. His powerful energy of blood and energy imprisoned the air and charged against the abyss, forcefully choking the flood dragon like turbulence. He seized the opportunity to subdue it for his own use. Luo Nan, who was at an absolute disadvantage in strength, had his water vapor body warp and blur. The stimulation, control, and conduction of his soul strength were not that clear. However, Wang Yong was still able to capture the strands that flowed in secret. They were like cow tendons and bowstrings. They hummed and trembled in the most chaotic corner. They shuttled back and forth within the incomprehensible folds of space. They each had their own direction, but they also intertwined and weaved. It was as if they wanted to turn this limited space in the bedroom into a magic cloak that could be easily manipulated. This was already the limit of what Wang Yong could sense. Some of it was even a figment of his imagination that relied on theory and experience. He was even more unclear on the details and purpose of Luo Nan's wave of movements. But this was already enough to help him capture the relatively clear range of effect of the power. He immediately mobilized his most advantageous power to forcefully break through. This series of senses, adjustments, and force exertion were rich and complex in detail. But when restored to the range that the vast majority of people could see, it was nothing more than Wang Yong taking a step and swinging his arm. There weren't even any clear movements of a punch. The entire bedroom, including the living room outside, suddenly sunk into a stifling silence. What followed was the frantic wringing of blood under the effect of the difference in internal and external pressure. Practically everyone's blood and energy instantly surged to the top of their heads in this simple movement. This had nothing to do with emotions. It was completely the power of an extraordinaire. It dominated the direction and flow of everything within the relevant range. Aside from Tugu, the only one who enjoyed immunity was Old Els. He maintained his original posture as he watched Luo Nan's body, which he could not see any abnormalities before, suddenly warp and turn incorporeal. It was like the gurgling smoke of a humidifier. Soon it disappeared without a trace. As for the blood donors in the room, as well as the bodyguards and personal staff who were caught in the crossfire, each and every one of their faces were flushed red. Some of them were even on the verge of collapsing. They were on the verge of fainting. Old Els frowned as he sighed in admiration at this supernatural power. He did not know whether or not this sort of attack would negatively affect the blood donors. Frankly speaking, he did not know whether or not it would negatively affect his own treatment. He hesitated for a moment, but he still chose to believe in the professionals. He did not say anything to interfere. He just narrowed his eyes and attentively sensed the changes within this body. If everything was normal? Old Els suddenly felt his heartbeat speed up, and it was completely irregular. It was like the problem of atrial fibrillation that had accompanied his body for dozens of years. He was not unfamiliar with this phenomenon, yet it came without reason. Old Els suddenly opened his eyes. And at this time, the various instruments that had been connected to his body all this time had already issued an alarm. Old Els felt that he should be a bit calmer, but the increasingly intense fluctuations of his heartbeat made him call out in a low voice. Wang Yong. The first to react was not Wang Yong. It was Tugu, who had been standing at the end of the bed all this time as the last line of defense. His reaction was very strange. He suddenly turned his head amidst Old El's cry. His line of sight was directed at the deformed sarcoma that was suspended in midair. It was connected to many conduits. This was the core transformation center provided by the Black Lion. It was the key to treating Old El's illness. Over here. Tu Ji's reminder was directed at Wang Yong, but Wang Yong himself had moved a bit earlier. He directly extended his hand to grab the sarcoma. Old Els was a bit baffled. He was actually able to follow this series of changes in movement. He was even able to see that before 2G's palm touched the sarcoma, the ugly little thing had already begun to throb on its own. It was like a heart that was exposed to the outside, or perhaps it was the only organ of an invisible fiendish demon that could be captured by the human eye. This was all Old Els could see. After his violently trembling heart broke through a certain threshold, it instantly destroyed his observation ability and crushed his rationality and will. He pinched his chest hard, wanting to speak, but he could no longer spit out a word. He could only vaguely hear Wang Yong's angry shout. Chapter 1056. The sudden collapse of Old El's heart rate also destroyed the offensive and defensive design and tacit understanding that Wang Yong and Tugu had formed. Wang Yong was actually at a loss for a time as Old Els twitched and struggled for his life on the bed. Where was Luo Nan? What kind of method would he use? How did he do it? At this moment, Wang Yong's surging qi and blood covered every inch of the bedroom and formed a highly compatible resonance with the turbulence in the abyss area. According to common sense, there was no creature that could stir up trouble in this kind of environment. Even if it was a darksider life form of legend, as long as it approached the material plane, it would similarly leave behind traces in this kind of powerful force field. Wang Yong could accept Luo Nan escaping into the depths of space, entering the depths of the abyss region, or even ascending the polar domain when Luo Nan saw that the situation was far from good. He could use his usual logic to explain it. But now, what was going on with the bright red sarcoma that was pulsating freely in the air and seemed to possess an incredible life rhythm? The tentacles, that were originally delivering the transformation fluid to Old Els, were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws in the air. What's going on? Seeing this, Wang Yongda had to make a temporary conclusion. He didn't know when, but the core of Luo Nan's power, which he had been sensing and capturing all this time, had already shifted to this ugly red sarcoma. In other words, Luo Nan had obtained control over the sarcoma. He had precisely grasped the most core link of the entire treatment system, directly threatening Old El's life. Even if it was just a clone, it wouldn't be easy for someone to steal their base, but it was still under their control. 2G's reaction was already considered fast, but as Old Els struggled on the bed, he had to stop his palm that was already reaching for the tumor. Tugu was very clear, and so was Wang Yong. If this clone died here with Old El's terrible condition, he really did not know if he would have another chance to calmly move. What was the Black Lion doing if such a deadly piece of equipment was casually stolen by others? What were the two of them doing at the scene? Tugu was still alright, as he was always calm and collected. As for Wang Yong, his originally ugly complexion was now covered with a layer of oily sheen, as if venom could come out at any time. The other people in the room had suffered from the blood vitality impact just now and were purely a burden. Wang Yong subconsciously wanted to go to the bedside to deal with Old El's terrible state. At this moment, a word popped out of 2G's mouth. Change? As the voice entered his ears, a sudden burst of gunfire came from outside the bedroom. The incident in the bedroom also caused chaos in the outside room. Wang Yong's eyelids twitched, but he didn't hesitate, nor was he distracted by the chaos outside. His center of gravity, which had shifted a little earlier, shifted again as his muscles contracted. He did not pay attention to Old Els, whose hands and feet were twitching on the bed. Instead, he forcefully made the nearly ebb interference field surge once more. This time it was not to capture the elusive Luo Nan. Instead, it was to crush the blood donors who had formed a circle around the bed. A life for a life. At the very least, he had to put on this posture. At the same time, 2G's hand, which had paused just now, once again reached out, grabbing at the bright red sarcoma that was right in front of him. Wang Yong had been the one to deal with Luo Nan just now, and Tugu had been the backup. Now they had to switch roles. This was because Luo Nan had cut into Wang Yong's blind spot of observation and thought. He had successfully infiltrated into 2G's range of control. Actually, Wang Yong still had doubts in his mind right now. Was Luo Nan's soul strength projection really inside that tumor? There were no changes in his visual space, but his sensory space was a mess. Luo Nan had already completely excluded Wang Yong from the main battlefield within the span of a few breaths under this chaotic mental judgment. Therefore, a switch was necessary. If Wang Yong didn't want to be a bystander at this critical moment, then he needed to display the deterrent power of an extraordinary, even if his actions were more despicable. Under the radiation of the power of 3 extraordinaries, all the other living beings within the entire suite were so weak that they weren't even worth mentioning. Therefore, this sort of switch in focus and direction was completely a gamble on the value of the target in each person's heart. Did Luo Nan really have a bit of weak humanity left in him, just like in the legends? Could Wang Yong and Tu Gu replace old elves in making such a fatal decision? In any case, not a single side had any intention of pulling back in this relatively cramped space at this moment. There was even a bomb that smashed in forcefully. Amidst the muffled explosion, Yu Zheng and the other blood donors who had yet to complete their intubation were suddenly blasted apart into an enormous hole in the wall. The door connecting the living room and the bedroom in this suite was relatively narrow and conservative. It paid more attention to privacy so the bodyguards outside could easily surround the door. However, there were still some problems with the room structure of the cruise ship when faced with inhuman power. The partition was assembled from light steel keel plasterboard. It looked like a complete piece, but in reality, there was a relatively large gap between the keel steel inside the plasterboard. The fellow who had smashed in had leaped out from the gap between the metal frames, perfectly avoiding the blood donors who didn't have any defensive capabilities. He had met Wang Yong's fist with equal precision. Tucker. Wang Yong recognized this logistics tycoon from the Central Pacific Ocean. He knew that Tucker was the adopted son of Bai Hao, the flesh and blood of Master Dem. In a certain sense, it would be more appropriate to describe them as allies. But it was this fellow who had broken through the wall, charging straight at Wang Yong's fist. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, Wang Yong saw the fellow's face. His face, which could be described as tyrannical and mighty, was now brimming with fear that completely contradicted his actions. It was to the extent that his entire facial structure was distorted. The tattoo on his cheek was infused with despair, as if it had transformed into an ominous demon snake that was slithering on his face. Wang Yong frowned and subconsciously slowed down his hand. The momentum of Tucker's charge was astonishing, but it wasn't a threat to an extraordinary. He didn't want to offend two important figures of the same camp because of this kind of man-made accident. Just as Wang Yong's fist changed from hard to soft, a dazzling light suddenly exploded from the corner of his eye. As for the power behind the piercing light wave and the impact it formed on the interference force field that he was leading, that was a problem for the next wave. No one could contend with the speed of light. Therefore, Wang Yong could only watch helplessly as the electric chain of light wave brushed past Tucker's head, which he had accidentally left behind, and cut right into Tucker's chest. Tucker's mouth was wide open, but he couldn't say anything. Or rather, the power that erupted from his body had drowned out everything. It was a powerful explosion. Most importantly, it had formed a strong collision with Wang Yong's previously powerful but relatively restrained control mode. The air exploded and the abyss shook. The network of blood transfusion catheters that crisscrossed like a spider web in the room instantly twisted and ruptured. The blood and transfusion fluids that were still flowing through the catheters were thrown all over the place, creating a mess. Chapter 1057. Most of the liquid droplets that were flung out did not even have the chance to land on the ground before they were directly crushed or even vaporized by the extreme power that surged back and forth in the room. The entire room instantly turned into a full-powered boiler. The boiling air rapidly expanded, and in the next second, there was a second explosion. The floor-to-ceiling window on the side of the bedroom that led to the balcony couldn't withstand the air pressure in this narrow space at all and shattered with a bang. The curtains were wrapped in glass shards and twisted alloy frames. As if swept by a storm, they were blown to the lower deck and the surface of the sea beyond. There were also two blood donors who were originally lying near the floor-to-ceiling windows. They were also swept up by the storm and slid against the reinforced glass railings of the balcony. Fortunately, the reinforced glass of the railings was of high quality. In the relatively open space, it was still relatively intact, so the two unlucky people did not suffer too much. After the storm in the house blew out, it was the turn of the airflow from the sea to flow back, mixed with moist water vapor. The clouds outside were getting lower and lower, almost merging with the surface of the sea. It was as if a heavy downpour could happen at any time. To the people in the eye of the storm, these were meaningless details. However, with such a commotion, it was inevitable that things would go out of control. Leaving aside the chaos on the lower deck on this side, the gunshots and explosions that echoed from the advanced suites at the bow of the ship instantly pushed a large number of so-called upper-class people in the area into the illusion that they had been attacked by terrorists. Panic and chaos quickly spread. Compared to the imaginary commotion caused by the fragmented information, the explosion in the Abyss district that changed from restraint to unrestrained was obviously more intuitive for some people. Once again, the Jadeite light cruiser was too small for an extraordinary. Everyone was able to pretend that they didn't know anything during the first wave of attacks. But when the sudden and powerful clash appeared, the minds of the many extraordinaries, who were previously confused and dizzy by Luo Nan's endless scriptures, couldn't help but be roused. They cast their senses over here one after another. Everything was open and above board. This was especially true for the few psychics. In fact, some of the B-class mental side experts could also sense this commotion. However, they were limited by their abilities, or perhaps they were directly scared off by the dangerous environment where extraordinary consciousness is gathered. Without a doubt, attention was also a distraction. If it was any other time it would have been fine. However, the current Wang Yong was being stirred up by the continuous changes. Once it dispersed. How unlucky. But then again, the way this energy works is so familiar. Who was it again? Regardless of the reason, Wang Yong's absent-mindedness had indeed given Tucker some space and time to stretch himself. And Tucker did indeed seize this opportunity. Well, let's just say he did. His body, which was far more robust than an ordinary person's, was driven by that explosive power. Like a bowstring that was released after it was fully drawn, he suddenly stretched out, not caring about any damage. Blood had already seeped out of his ears, nose and mouth, and his eyeballs were completely red. It was obvious that withstanding this kind of power that exceeded the limits of the human body was a huge burden on his body. However, the fact that he was able to withstand this power without dying proved that he had the qualifications to struggle for survival. His mouth was still wide open, and no discernible sound came from his throat. There was only a muffled explosion that directly compressed the air and forcefully broke through Wang Yong's control. It was as if a clap of thunder rang in his ears. Even earlier than the thunder, there were bolts of lightning and fire. However, this wave of lightning and fire did not pierce through Wang Yong's back, but directly burst forth from Tucker's body. This time, even if Wang Yong was a fool, he could finally capture that familiar feeling and turn it into a definite concept. Electromagnetic direction. Jin Tong. Wait a minute, Tucker seems to be electromagnetic as well? Useful and useless thoughts constantly intertwined and influenced each other. While Wang Yong was absent-minded, Tucker, wrapped in dazzling electric chains, charged forward like a mad bull, charging straight into Wang Yong's midsection. It had to be said that Tucker's control over his power was extremely crude, and there were also some subtle and ambiguous areas in terms of its level. However, the power he was currently carrying had indeed become a substantial threat to Wang Yong. Wang Yong's eyes were cold. He returned a punch, parried his elbow, and lifted his knee. His perfect control over his power allowed him to effectively mobilize the blood and qi in his entire body. It seemed like he was defending, but he was actually using defense as offense. By relying on his perfectly synchronized interference and control over the material and spiritual planes, he dispelled Tucker's powerful initial attack and seized the opportunity to counterattack. When his knee fell, the entire floor of the bedroom shook and deformed like waves, and the state of the room became even more unbearable. The electric chains that came charging at him were like flowing water. They streaked across the edge of Wang Yong's reef-like defensive force field. Even though a small portion of it managed to penetrate through, it only made one side of his body feel slightly numb. Wang Yong, on the other hand, took advantage of his steps to agitate the gathered blood and qi and fused it with the turbulence he subdued in the abyss region. With a hidden explosive force, he struck Tucker's side abdomen with an uppercut. This punch was extremely ruthless. When it hit its target, Tucker's body seemed to have been electrocuted. His body twitched and jumped, and the lower left half of his ribs were immediately crushed. The explosive sound that came from his wide-open mouth was also cut off by the bloody foam that came out from his mouth. Wang Yong furrowed his brows when his attack succeeded. Due to the force of his punch, the back half of Tucker's body slid sideways. Tucker's previous jumping was essentially like a slippery loach. It cleverly dispelled the heavy injury that would have dislocated all his internal organs. His body also fell to the side, coincidentally avoiding Wang Yong's attack. This should have nothing to do with Jin Tong or electromagnetic energy. Instead, it should be the foundation of yoga, which was a traditional practice in the subcontinent. This attack was completely Tucker's instincts, and it had indeed reached the limit of what he could handle. His blood-red eyes had lost their focus, and his mind was completely muddled. The direction in which he fell was exactly where Tugu was. The entire bedroom was not very big, especially the area at the end of the bed. There were also the blood donors placed by the wall. Wang Yong, Tugu, and Tucker were all extremely strong people. The three of them piled up there, filling up the entire area. Other than the moment when Tucker broke through the wall, all his other movements had to be executed in the space of an inch. After all, old Els was not completely dead yet, was he? Taker's fall had indeed caused him to crash into 2G's back. The electric glow on his body flickered, and he still looked very intimidating. Wang Yong reached back and grabbed Taker's back. It was also at this opportunity that Wang Yong glanced in front of 2Gu. He saw that this expert, who was even more powerful than him, had just grasped the bright red tumor in his palm. Then he exerted his strength. Following an indescribable strange sound, the entire tumor was forcefully crushed by 2Gu into blood and flesh. The blood and flesh splattered out from the gaps between his fingers. Some of the flesh directly hit Taker's face and it was a bloody mess. So ruthless, but it's considered a success? Naturally, such a thought flashed through Wang Yong's mind. But in the next moment, a sharp and ear-piercing hissing sound exploded. It was filled with madness and chaos. The source of the sound was 2G's palm. Chapter 1058. This howl exploded strangely and fiercely. It had a kind of reckless intent of annihilation. Its characteristics were like a barrel of intense kerosene. It detonated in the abyss region and then rushed back to the material plane. A wave of interference surged. It was extremely vicious. Even with Wang Yong's abilities, his eardrums still hurt slightly. His mind became dizzy, but this didn't hinder his judgment. It's Black Lion. He left behind a poison curse. Black Lion ran amok in Africa. He was an expert in death and plague curse techniques. With the importance of the sarcoma, it was normal for him to set up a backup plan. But Luonan didn't explode it when he attacked Black Lion. He only released it now. What was the meaning of this? Caught off guard, Wang Yong was swept by the poison curse and suffered a small loss. 2Gu, who was at the point of the poison curse's explosion, received an even greater impact. Wang Yong saw that 2G's sleeve, where he had crushed the sarcoma, had a clear ripple. The ripple traveled upwards, causing 2G's upper body to lean back slightly. The blood vessels on the side of his neck bulged slightly. But that was all. 2Gu casually flung away the remaining flesh and blood from his palm. Half of his face was covered by his sunglasses, but no changes could be seen. This fellow's cultivation was truly bottomless. Wang Yong's heart was filled with regret, but he overcame the insubstantial effects of Black Lion's poison curse. His fingers clasped Taker's sleeveless clothes and fiercely pulled him back. Come back. Wang Yong didn't just pull Taker's clothes. He forcefully suppressed Taker's violent and unrestrained force field, not allowing it to affect 2Gu in any way. Actually, 2Gu had enough time to react, but he didn't pay attention to Taker from beginning to end. He displayed his absolute trust in Wang Yong. With Wang Yong's understanding of 2Gu, trust wasn't necessary. It was more like a principle of comradeship. On the contrary, Wang Yong wanted to spit out. The electric light that activated Taker just now must have come from your side, right? In any case, Wang Yong didn't disappoint 2Gu. Even though Taker was in a strange and violent state and Wang Yong couldn't completely control him, Wang Yong still forcefully pulled him back, not letting him touch 2G's clothes. Although Taker's will was muddled, his body's instincts were still there. He continued to struggle like a beast that had lost its mind. It was even more impossible for Wang Yong to kill him at this time, so he simply cooperated and used a joint technique, hoping to break the big black man's arms and legs to get the ball. The struggle in the tiny space still looked intense. Their joints collided and the friction was electrifying. Strong winds blew in all directions, and even the cold sea breeze that blew in from the balcony formed a strong and disorderly turbulence. But in Wang Yong's consciousness, the situation was basically under control. He was able to faintly sense that the soul strength Luonan had projected had been crushed to pieces along with the fleshy tumor. Right? Only then did 2Gu turn around. Separated by their sunglasses, they exchanged a tacit look. Then both of them frowned. Outside the window, the wind howled and the sound of water roared. It was as if waves were crashing against the side of the cruise ship, hitting all the way to the floor where the suite was. There were really splashes of water splashing in, drenching the two unconscious blood donors on the balcony. Preposterous. This place was at least 60 meters away from sea level. If the waves hit here, could it be a tsunami? Of course not. It was just that the dark clouds in the sky outside had formed a waterspout within the turbulence of the atmosphere. The waterspout just so happened to hit the bow of the ship. The aftermath had yet to die down, bringing with it the airflow of water. It swept across the side of the cruise ship, bringing with it countless screams. There was even a thick fog-like cloud of smoke. Under the effect of the fierce winds, the smoke was pushed inside. It was stimulated by the leaping electricity in the air of the bedroom. Crackling sounds rang out. He went outside? Wang Yong immediately thought of Luo Nan. From his position he could see the situation outside the balcony. His gaze had just drifted a bit when Tu Ji's deep voice rang out, "Over here." "Where?" Tu Ge didn't reply. Wang Yong looked over, but all he saw was the reflection of the dazzling sparks of electricity from the sunglasses on Tu Ji's face. In the domain of pure vision, the flickering sparks of electricity still possessed an extremely powerful dominance over the current bedroom. Fine sparks of electricity interweaved in the air. They were reflected on the black lenses, and they reflected off each other. For a time, there was an extremely strange and gorgeous feeling. Wang Yong didn't have the mood to appreciate it. He had been alerted by Tu Ge and had sensed some abnormalities. The main source of power was obviously Taker. This beast had lost its mind, but it was still stubbornly resisting. Sparks of electricity flowed on its body, piercing through the air. It was the most eye-catching. However, whether it was Tu Ge or Wang Yong, they both felt that the nature of electricity and fire, at least a part of it, seemed to have changed. The feeling it gave them was, this electricity and fire was not the same electricity and fire. Its nature was vastly different. To be more precise, it was a completely different kind of electricity and fire that had inexplicably seeped in. Ah! A hoarse roar burst forth from Taker's throat, interrupting Wang Yong's thoughts. This fellow's right elbow joint had clearly been smashed by Wang Yong. His left rib was also heavily injured. His body's functions were greatly damaged, but he still didn't seem to have an end. Even the explosive power within Taker's body was being urged to rise without regard for anything else. It was like an overloaded steam turbine. The blades spun violently, and it could distort and collapse at any time in an ultra-high pressure environment. He had truly lost his mind. But how did Luo Nan do it? It was very clear that he had come to the conclusion that the situation was under control too early. Whether it was in front of him or in his senses, there was no sign of Luo Nan. However, the youngest extraordinary, who was merely projecting his soul strength, used all sorts of methods to announce his existence. He was just like an incorporeal and formless soul. He could see nothing, yet he was there. He might even be standing in front of them in the open, watching them with a cold and disdainful gaze. Wang Yong was already a bit impatient in his mind. The sweet had truly turned into a pot of porridge ever since Luo Nan started moving. The material plane and the mental plane. Control and anti-control. Destruction and anti-destruction. There were also unforeseen accidents that rose and fell in succession. It was as if there would never be an end to them. Yet these damned accidents always showed their dirtiest butts to Luo Nan. They only showed flattering smiles to Luo Nan. It was very easy for one's mental state to explode after encountering too many of these accidents. Wang Yong gradually came to a realization. Luo Nan's vision and level were clearly not limited to a simple line of sight. He wasn't restricted to people. He wasn't stagnant with objects. Instead, he was able to manipulate and mobilize all the operational resources in the surroundings, integrating them into an inconceivable domain. This was the difference between the mental side and the fleshly side. But for a 17-year-old kid to accomplish this, Wang Yong's hand suddenly went numb. It was Taker, whose chest had been caved in and his hand broken. Taker struggled once more, directly using his teeth this time. He turned his head and hissed, wanting to bite Wang Yong's throat. His bloody face was truly malevolent and terrifying. But that wasn't all. The speckles of blood and minced meat twitched and throbbed. There was electricity connecting and connecting to each other, connecting to each other. What was going on? Chapter 1059. Wang Yong would not be hurt by Taker's desperate struggle. He exerted more force with his arm that was holding Taker's joints. With a muffled sound from his shoulder blade, Taker's body involuntarily bent down. No matter how white and sharp Taker's teeth were, it was no use. However, looking at the extremely active blood and plasma on Taker's face, as well as the crisscrossing electric network, Wang Yong finally understood where the alien electric fire that had inexplicably seeped into his body came from. Taker no longer had the strength to fight back. Wang Yong also had the mental energy to ponder the mode of operation of this alien electric fire, but for a moment he was completely clueless. He subconsciously freed one of his hands, wanting to exert some interference to see if he could use it to uncover part of the inner mechanism. "Don't move!" Tu Ji's shout pierced his eardrums. His sternness was unprecedented. Wang Yong's finger stopped right in front of Taker's face. Tucker, who had been frantically struggling, also froze. Even Wang Yong was confused. Who was 2G's shout directed at? Before he could clear his doubts, he saw that the blood and flesh on Tucker's face, which were attracted to each other, were sinking down. Or rather, Tucker's facial skin, together with the blood and flesh, had turned into clay or dough that could be kneaded at will. Moreover, it was much more delicate. Wang Yong saw that Tucker's facial skin was torn apart by his fingertips, revealing densely packed blood vessels and neural networks. It was the most sophisticated circulation and control network of the human body that was accepting the foreign blood and flesh, threading a needle and stitching them together. It was precise and unbelievably fast. It was as if the front end of each other was a well-designed yin and yang magnetic pole that was perfectly fitted and matched each other. But this was definitely not the case for them. Then, this was simply a power of creation that erased all disharmony, turning this incredible reconstruction into the most relaxing and pleasant automatic process. This was the so-called uncanny workmanship. Wang Yong even saw some of the extremely secretive and crucial nodes of the circulation of qi and blood in the human body, especially in the head area. This was a detail that he had yet to fully explain. Wang Yong could not continue. Originally, he wanted to see 2G's expression and reaction, but when he encountered such a miraculous scene that made him speechless, he forgot to raise his head for a moment. He also completely forgot about the idea of interfering and destroying. After 2 seconds, 2G's thick and powerful palms slowly reached out from behind Tucker's stiff body, as if he was going to do the same thing as what Wang Yong had planned. Don't move. This time it was Wang Yong's turn to stop. 2Gu seemed to have said something, but it was too vague for Wang Yong to hear clearly. However, it was also at this moment that the two extraordinaries beside them simultaneously sensed yet another tumultuous change within Tucker's body. Wang Yong's feeling was more direct because his hand, which was twisting Tucker's shoulder joint, was suddenly bounced off by a strong magnetic field that suddenly increased in power. Tucker himself, on the other hand, did not move. At this moment he was no longer a powerhouse that possessed initiative. Instead, he had transformed into an exhibit that was constantly being innovated. The big guy, who was already riddled with scars, half knelt on the ground, his body stiff. But even though he was frozen to death, the powerful magnetic field radiating from his body was constantly interacting with the void around him. It was complex and deep. It was completely different from his previous berserk and restless state. Jintong. This was not the first time Wang Yong's mind had turned over this name, but this time he blurted it out. At this very moment, Tucker's converged and operated energy and force field had achieved the closest connection on a level. Tucker was in the electromagnetic direction, and Jintong was also in the electromagnetic direction. However, it must be known that the electromagnetic direction and the electromagnetic direction were not the same. Powers of the same origin were fundamentally different in terms of structure and operation. This was the fundamental standard to distinguish extraordinaries from ordinary cultivators. Tucker's initial eruption was very astonishing, but in the eyes of extraordinaries, there was still an enormous gap between him and Jintong. It was like the gap between the jadeite light and the ancient sailboat. But at this very moment, this essential gap of time and generation was inconceivably bridged and equalized. Even if it had not been tested in actual combat, even if it was just for show, it was still an astonishing achievement to be able to scare two extraordinaries. This was absolutely not something Tucker could do. In this current situation, Luo Nan, and only Luo Nan, was able to use his inconceivable structure ability to complete this astonishing leap between generations. It seemed that the tumor, which had already been crushed, had played a very crucial role. The problem was, where was Luo Nan? What ability was this? What kind of operation was this? Wang Yong discovered that he had fallen into a dead end in his thoughts. It was fine if he did not think deeply about it, but once he did, he became so irritated that he wanted to explode. He should give up as a bodyguard. Therefore he asked a person who was more likely to know the answer. Mr. Butcher. Before he could finish speaking, the wind whistled. His vision darkened, and his mouth and nose were blocked. Another wave of mist and clouds poured into the bedroom from the boundless sea covered by dark clouds. Compared to the previous wave, the mist was much denser. It was to the extent that one couldn't even see their fingers in front of them. On the contrary, when the lightning flickered on Tucker's body, a few silhouettes were illuminated. It was reasonable to say that someone of Wang Yong's ability would not be confused by it. However, the mist and lightning before his eyes were absolutely not the external appearance of the material plane. Visual experience did not count. In fact, the two did not undermine each other. On the contrary, they interweaved and blended together, connecting the material and mental domains to form their own layout. Wang Yong's mind swayed a bit in that instant. He practically believed that he had sunk into the depths of thunderclouds 10,000 meters in the sky. The floor beneath his feet and even the entire environment of the room lacked the sense of space-time. This was really wrong? He had really sunk into the domain of space and time. At this critical moment, the structure of Luonan's power circulation could not be concealed no matter what. He had completely revealed his cards. Wang Yong's blood and energy circulated and contracted, but his senses grew increasingly sensitive. He could vaguely feel the method, trend, and direction of the power usage. Dual drive. Talker was one. There was also the mist within the mist. Suddenly, 2G's figure exploded. His long arms stretched out and pierced into the depths of the mist with a ripping sound. However, no blood splashed 3 feet. Instead, a flame inexplicably ignited within the mist, allowing them to see a piece of cloth burn to nothing. Severed. Luonan brought it in. Wang Yong spoke in a low voice. He had the impression that Luonan seemed to have said that this thing was a painting material. Luonan had tossed it here during the first exchange. As Wang Yong spoke, a strange and deformed phantom appeared where the mist and flame of the cloth met. It seemed to be the amalgamation of a cow and a spider. Presumably, it had suffered heavy injuries under 2G's fist force. It struggled for half a second before collapsing and scattering. It even let out a strange cry. The sound sank into the depths of the mist, but it actually carried the echoes of the distant deep space. It could be seen just how complex the environment and laws of a mere 20 square meters of bedroom had become due to Luonan's method of distorting space and time. Fortunately, this sort of space and time environment was destined to not exist for long. In fact, when Tugu exploded with power and struck this monster, one of the driving axes, Wang Yong's energy surged as he responded. The fierce and tyrannical energy of the two extraordinaries interweaved with each other. It caused the already unstable chaotic structure of space and time to begin to sway and deform. Many parts of the structure collapsed and split apart. If this was a battle of life and death, everyone would have already begun to change moves. But the reality was that there was no back. Luonan's energy circulation framework, which he had just gained a bit of clarity, was completely withdrawn. It was so direct and efficient that the mist and cloud rolled out in reverse. They mixed into the cumulus clouds of the ocean and sky, which had nearly swallowed the giant ship. They fused together in the blink of an eye, becoming indistinguishable from each other. Wang Yong was stupefied. Such a strong start and weak finish really felt extremely awkward. Then he looked at the bedroom. First was the bed. Old El's was still the same. After Tugu had crushed the tumor, he had cut off the path of Luonan's influence. He had been maintaining the bed ever since. Even though there were 2 waves of smoke and water scouring the bed, it was still relatively dry. It could barely be seen. As for the other places, it was so spacious. Where was he? Chapter 1060. Old Elsa's personal attendants and bodyguards were still there, but they had been knocked unconscious by the continuous impacts. But what about the blood donors? They were all gone. Wang Yong could not help but think, could it be that the cloud of smoke that swept out had already brought all of these people out? But there were a total of 9 people. They were distributed in every bedroom. It wasn't just the balcony, the ones by the window, but there were also those close to the inside of the room. There were even those right next to Wang Yong. Actually, Wang Yong was able to guess the general logic behind this. Luonan had placed them into the chaotic space-time domain, taking advantage of this opportunity to quietly move the blood donors away. He was even able to guess that the chaotic space-time domain that had enveloped them just now was a double-layered sack. One layer contained them and the other layer was used to save people. This was the train of thought, but what about the details? These devilish details that seriously defied experience and common sense were enough to make one's scalp swell and blood rush to the top just by thinking a bit deeper. Wang Yong was struck by the rush of blood energy. He watched as the cloud of water vapor melted into the low-hanging clouds outside, and he was unable to restrain his emotions for a time. He took advantage of the fact that he could still vaguely grasp the traces of energy and information flowing past. He took a step past 2G's side and charged toward the balcony. His actions at this time were no longer the thoughts of a bodyguard. Instead, they were the most instinctive reactions of an extraordinary whose dignity had been violated. His body had yet to arrive, but his fierce blood energy was already like a heavy hammer. It smashed the glass railings of the balcony into pieces in one fell swoop. The glass shards filled the sky and shot toward the clouds outside. Wang Yong. Tugu rarely called out Wang Yong's name, but in reality this call was a bit too late. Before the mechanical waves that pushed through the air could completely enter Wang Yong's ears, the glass shards that had shot out suffered a heavy blow from a certain force. A considerable portion of them were simply unable to withstand the enormous pincer attack from opposite directions. They simply turned into fine powder. But in the end there were still some, perhaps due to problems with the point of force and angle of attack, that were preserved. They hissed as they shot back. Wang Yong actually did not dare to take them head-on. His mind was shaken, and his figure continuously slanted to the side a few times to avoid these dangerous shards. However, he could not avoid a sudden drop in speed. And in this gap of charging and sluggishness, there was actually someone who was a step ahead of him and appeared on the balcony without a sound or aura. Wang Yong's forward momentum had not ended, but the man's toes were on the edge of the balcony, and he stood exceptionally steadily. The distance between the two of them shrank rapidly, and in the end, their faces were almost touching. At such a dangerous distance, neither of them had the magnanimity and willpower to entrust their lives to each other. Both sides suddenly attacked. In the blink of an eye, fists, palms, fingers, elbows, shoulders, and all the other parts that could be used were continuously slashing and colliding like a storm. At that moment, Tu Ji's voice finally reached them, but it was shattered by the ear-piercing sound of metal colliding. Stop! Tu Ji's second roar exploded. This time he had already used the sound kill skill. It was rare that he was so precise that he gave both sides a chance to stop fighting. The metal wind abruptly disappeared, and his qi and blood hummed quietly. Wang Yong took 2 steps back and returned to the bedroom. As for the one on the balcony, his toes were still touching the ground, and his back was against the sea, firmly standing in the same place. Her hair was short and neat, and her face was exquisite and bright. She was the chief master of the Eye of Secret Deeds, Lady Wan Luhua. Wang Yong stared at him with a sharp gaze, but he had already regained his composure. This was because at the same time, he could sense that Blood Demon's scorching and irascible aura wasn't far from here. Instead, it was the mental side that suddenly distanced themselves. It wasn't that they were afraid of anything. On the contrary, they were clearly bursting with curiosity. They were no longer concealing themselves. Waves surged on the mental plane as they chased after the traces Luonan left behind. Most likely, they wanted to figure out what was going on with the spacetime domain technique that was practically perfect for combat. It seemed to be able to lift something heavy as if it were light. In the end, Wang Yong wasn't of the mental side. In fact, Wan Luhua had interfered and his attention was swaying back and forth. He had already lost the ability to sense Luonan's remnant aura. He didn't have the strength to chase after Luonan even if he wanted to. And at this time the door to the room was pushed open once more. Blood Demon walked in while clapping his hands. The hole in the partition wall just so happened to expose his particularly proud smiling face. Never seen this before, huh? If his main body was here he might be able to do this. Wang Yong's words blurted out, but his mind had already spun in circles. But soon he didn't have any follow-up. It was able to trap, or at least confuse, 2 extraordinaries for a short period of time. This proved that this domain possessed a certain bearing capacity toward high-energy targets. He had captured 9 people in one fell swoop, and all of them were fellows without any extraordinary powers. As long as half of them were able to survive in the end, it could be said that the living conditions of the internal space were acceptable. If this was true, then it would be solid proof that this spacetime domain technique could indeed be used in combat. It would be the same even if Luonan's main body was here. There were no logical traps such as grasping or lifting. In other words, Luonan, who had grasped this technique, was practically invincible in a low-intensity battle against extraordinaries of the same level. As for a life-and-death struggle, further verification was needed. Then again, how many times had life-and-death struggles between extraordinaries occurred after the 90s? Wang Yong's profession was bodyguard. He didn't need to consider things that were too deep. But even if he used just a tiny bit of his idle brain power to consider, he could predict the wails coming from the administrator's camp. Someone really did scream. What the hell? Who did I provoke? Black Lion's fat and sturdy body squeezed through the door. He just happened to arrive behind Blood Demon. He raised his palm and smacked Blood Demon's shoulder. Did I provoke you? Blood Demon wasn't annoyed. He turned his head and bared his teeth in amusement. Go say that to the other side. I came and he left. You only came after he left. Blood Demon spoke the truth of what he saw. Black Lion chuckled. He puffed up his belly and strode into the messy bedroom. He looked around a few times and clicked his tongue a few times. Does anyone remember that this is my room? They also came to look for you, Blood Demon added coldly from behind. Look for me? Such good weather. Black Lion spoke carelessly. He looked at the dark clouds outside the window. His tone changed. I'm saying that with such special weather and everyone having nothing to do, we should at least go to the open-air deck and drink afternoon tea together. What's the point of messing around here? Blood Demon put his hands in his pockets and nodded. As long as it doesn't rain, your suggestion isn't bad. Whether it rains or not, isn't it a matter of a word from that person? But it's not a matter of a word here, right? It won't take too much. Black Lion strolled slowly to the head of the bed. He lowered his eyes and swept his gaze across Old El's face, which had turned purple and black. He curled his thick lips. I told you not to catch a family and take advantage of them. This doesn't seem to be the point. I mean, since it's already like this, why should we continue messing around for him? Tugu heard this and turned his head to look. Black Lion smiled at him. With this smile he flicked his finger. With a muffled sound, a rotten watermelon exploded on the bed. Red juice and white flesh splattered everywhere. Done. If only I had done this earlier. The room was quiet for a moment, which made Black Lion's voice even louder. It's upstairs, the poolside bar. It's relaxing and pleasing to the eye. There's enough coffee, drinks, and refreshments. My treat. Chapter 1061. Chapter 579. Afternoon Tea, Part 2. In the end, Black Lion's slogan was just a slogan. It was said to be both relaxing and pleasing to the eye. The current atmosphere was not something that could be easily relaxed just by changing the location of the meeting to the pool deck. As for pleasing to the eye, the gunshots and explosions in the high-class suites area had long since scared the nearby upper-class people and all sorts of people. Coupled with the dark clouds that suddenly pressed down, it was definitely not suitable for outdoor activities. Right now, one could see that the poolside was completely empty. The usual scenery could not be seen. Constance and Wan Luhua were outstanding beauties among the people who came one after the other, but no one dared to persuade them to change into swimsuits, right? So the reality was that everyone was sitting or standing on the pool deck. All they saw were faces that were familiar to the point of no surprise. Only they were closer to the thick clouds in the sky. Their mouths and noses were filled with a slightly fishy dampness when they breathed. They could vaguely feel the rich free electrons flowing within a magnetic field that was so weak that it was like an illusion. Frankly speaking, no one liked this sort of environment. Interest was another matter. Constance and the star which rushed over under the drive of interest. Perhaps the death which was here as well, but she did not come out to greet them. Earlier they had used their soul strength to track the traces of Luonan's spacetime domain. It was clear that the tracking was not very successful. They wanted to take this opportunity to meet and confirm. The problem was that Luonan did not immediately show himself. This caused this social activity, which was already somewhat unworthy of its name, to become more and more lacking in theme. Fortunately, the group of extraordinaries were able to quickly find a replacement. It was the only injured person on the deck right now, Tacker. This dark-skinned big fellow should be the most miserable one right now, judging from his appearance. His 2 arms were fractured, his left leg was fractured, several of his ribs were broken, and there were many contusions on his shoulders and neck. There was no need to mention the invisible internal injuries. Right now, his consciousness did not seem to be very clear. He leaned against the leg of a table under a parasol by the side of the pool. His head hung low as he accepted Wan Liuhua's bone setting. This treatment was quite high. The problem was that he did not show any signs of returning to his senses. His 2 eyes stared blankly at the surface of the pool in a daze. It was as if he did not know that he had become the focus of the extraordinary's eyes. Every bolt of lightning that flashed past his body was particularly eye-catching. Especially Constance. This top-notch world spiritist's line of sight penetrated through the shadow of his hood. He accurately captured the details of the interaction between Tacker's body and his body, the interaction between matter and spirit, as well as the even more intricate structure built upon those details. The so-called framework was in fact not intuitive enough. Most of it was half speculation and half deduction. However, for an expert such as Constantine, he could still integrate the fragmented information into a relatively intuitive, foreseeable result, and apply the result to a specific situation for further deduction. In the end, Constance no longer looked at Tacker. In her mind, there was only the perimeter, the conversion of electromagnetism, and the collision of the virtual and the real. Whether it was in the material plane or the spiritual sea, it formed its own system. They were all solemn and orderly, and their formation was strict. If this piece of Dharma was replaced with the abyssal region and made a deduction, there would be a heavenly lightning spear that was forged from the depths of the abyssal region. In the blink of an eye, it took shape and flew down. Lightning bolts flew everywhere, making it hard to distinguish between real and fake. This was no longer the feeling of a physical attack but a mental attack. In particular, it was extremely familiar. Back on the island of Chan City, the mysterious expert had resisted her and Ma Luan's joint efforts to destroy Gong Qi's fleshly body. It was very similar. There is only one truth. It was hard to say whether it was mocking or joking words that flowed out from the hood. Does it look like it? Blood Demon suddenly popped out from the side. Did you also notice the card that was just played? Old Man Mi Chi's drawing materials and Luo Nan's handwriting. When combined together, it definitely looks like it. Constance frowned under the hood. It was clear that Blood Demon didn't want her to study it too thoroughly. He interjected and forcefully changed the topic. If Blood Demon was truly shameless, there really weren't many in the world who could do anything to him. I was just thinking that this year's new cards would be fine if they weren't played, but they would be played in 2 sets. One is a limited edition, and the other is a replica commemorative edition. The former needs the most recent ranking, while the latter doesn't change the current ranking. It serves as a commemoration of the previous era. There weren't many people present who were interested in Blood Demon's idea. Wang Yong, who was the person involved, was still brooding over the results and process. He recalled the details and asked from afar, "That toy can emit a power similar to the main body? Is it a transfer, a projection, or an imitation?" Blood Demon went, He didn't respond for a time, but there was no need for him to respond. Only half a second passed before the people at the poolside bar sensed something at practically the same time. There were clear warped ripples on the mental and material interference level that they could reach. From nothingness, an additional domain rolled out from the originally smooth structure of the void. It was like a flower that bloomed in an instant and then quickly withered. However, the space that temporarily expanded and bloomed was enough to spit out the group of people, allowing them to return to this normal world. No one died? The distance was a bit far. But it didn't matter. Aside from old Els, whose head had already been blown off, none of the extraordinaries present were particularly interested in these unlucky experimental subjects. Even if they had some extra purpose, they had to give face to the young and vigorous Mr. Luo. It wasn't good to immediately brush aside the young and vigorous Mr. Luo's face. More importantly, these people were sent several hundred meters away. The core energy belonging to Luo Nan appeared in the clouds above the poolside bar. Everyone shifted their gazes at the same time by chance. They saw a cloud rich in water vapor. It was as if it was being pulled down by a powerful sea breeze. Then it was blown away and took form. It was like a master painter splashing ink on a painting. At first glance, one could feel its spirit. It was none other than Luo Nan. However, this sort of shaping technique presented a flying energy that broke free from the bindings of concreteness. It was faintly discernible, faintly discernible. It was quite different from before. "Bro!" Blood Demon called out loudly. Luo Nan didn't respond. In fact, he didn't pay attention to the 7 extraordinaries here for now. Instead, he directly issued an order to a certain person to the side. "Professor Bai, go and clean up the mess with the blood donors. I've asked Sister Yingying to go over there. She can help out as well." Bai Xinyan arrived at the poolside deck. She didn't ask for details. She didn't need to ask. She just needed to be self-aware. If she didn't do well, she would suffer. Bai Xinyan gave a slight bow and then left the deck. Only now did Luo Nan apologize to these extraordinaries. "I'm sorry. That water vapor fake body was scattered. It's difficult to reform and take form. Will take a bit of time. It's not convenient to talk right now. You guys talk first." The others didn't matter. No matter what reason Luo Nan took out, it was fine to just treat it as the truth. Only Black Lion, who had picked a seat first, sat down on his back. He chuckled and interjected. "Stonehead doesn't care about this. There's no need to give them a way out. They broke their legs. Who are they putting on an act for?" Wang Yong, who stood in a corner out of habit, tilted his head toward Black Lion. Black Lion's eyes couldn't be seen behind his sunglasses. Tugo acted as if he didn't hear Black Lion at all. He just stood not too far away from Tucker, observing quietly. He didn't seem to be annoyed at all. Luonan didn't respond to Black Lion's words. He didn't care if that person was embarrassed or not. This fake body that had yet to take form floated directly above the center of the pool, pulling away from everyone by the side of the pool. The moment he hovered, the water below him surged. Many slender limbs stirred the surface of the water. There was also a bull's head bobbing up and down in the water. The bull's head mooed miserably. "I'm going to die. I'm going to die." Chapter 1062. Nyogue was a very pompous fellow, but this time he was probably speaking the truth. This was because his current situation was different from when he was chased by the ship's slicing blade, or when Luonan had lost his horns and his scalp under torture. He was in a state where his stomach was broken and his intestines were flowing out. A large hole had opened up in his chest and abdomen, where his mutation was the most severe. Blood mixed with a strange ghostly glow gushed out, quickly dyeing the center of the swimming pool with a layer of demonic color. This aquatic species was doing its best to stay on the surface of the water. It was afraid that the pool water would pour in through the hole and wash out its innards, if it had any. This is interesting. Black Lion, who had been ignored by Luonan, knew how to have fun. He immediately slapped his thick thigh and revealed a mouth full of black gold teeth. Yes, the smell of incense under the sunlight. What the hell was their sunlight? But if he was referring to the Amaterasu order, then it was very appropriate. Luonan finally shot a glance over. Black Lion was very knowledgeable, but he didn't negotiate when it came to selling people out. The others might not be unaware of this, but their mouths were much tighter. Luonan still didn't respond. He turned his gaze back. The injuries on Nyogue's body were caused by Luonan forcefully summoning him from the spatial fault during their previous confrontation. Tugu had pierced through his body. Luonan had Mother Micah, so he didn't need it. He just used it as a cover to divert Tuji's attention. For Nyogue, this was an unexpected calamity. However, Luonan wasn't prepared to apologize to this cannibal. "I'm really going to die." Even though Nyogue had a broken mouth, he was indeed very weak from his injuries. He struggled repeatedly, but he was unable to float to the surface of the water. Instead, his howls became even more miserable. Finally, Luonan spoke to him. He was slow and unhurried. "It will be very difficult to make up for it. Do you want to change your way of living? Change your way of existing?" No one in the pool or by the pool completely understood these words. Luonan didn't care about everyone's ability to understand. He continued to speak. "Actually, half of your body has already been stretched out, but you were pushed over. You don't know what to do next. Those who know won't easily tell you. As for me, I know a little, but there are some details that I still need to calculate." Luonan laughed to himself when he spoke to this point. "There's no point in telling you all this. It doesn't matter if you're willing or not. The current situation is beyond your control." "B-boss?" The bull demon's screams also stopped. It opened its mouth wide, but it could not spit out a single word. It presented the image of a terrified bull head. It was actually quite comical, at least in the eyes of outsiders. To Nyogue himself, its brain had begun to turn chaotic due to its heavy injuries. It was no longer enough to support such complex considerations. Even the surging emotions were forcefully stifled in front of Luonan's false body of cloud chi, which focused more on the mind than the form. In reality, Luonan's fake body, which had yet to completely solidify, had already projected countless control lines that were hard to see with the naked eye and hard to pry into with mental senses. They permeated into Nyogue's body and completely controlled all of its functions. Nyogue quieted down. Luonan was already very familiar with this mode. Nyogue's body had practically no secrets to him. If he had to pinpoint a blind spot, then the blind spot probably existed in the connection between its chest and abdomen, the nothingness thicket region that radiated ghostly fluorescence. It was the crystallization of the Great Zay Order's Dark Dragon God belief system that had been accumulated and precipitated for many years. This structure, which was derived from the fluorescence, was the combination and distortion of a living being's belief. It was no longer dependent on the sensory plane. It formed a kind of pure mental expression that broke away from the concrete material form. This was the materialization of a plant-type belief system structure. Just as Meng Chong once said, this thing could be the embryonic form of the solidified configuration of the abyss region. It could also be used as the embryo of a sacrificial vessel of an order. It could be transformed into a priceless treasure in the domain of secret orders. However, Luonan's foothold was quite different. He focused his gaze on the tree of nothingness, which was growing dimmer and dimmer in the daytime. Gue could actually see it more clearly in its dying state. In this pure spiritual expression, there was a kind of strange vitality vaguely coiled around. Its relationship with Gue was like that of an infant in a womb, but it wasn't as pure. It was also like an insect egg within a host's body, but it wasn't overly sinister. It was neither close nor distant. It was both real and illusory. Luonan made a preliminary conclusion about this fantasy breed. This tree of nothingness might be the embryo of a fantasy breed that was being nurtured. Of course, Luonan wasn't going to analyze the structure of the tree of nothingness or the fantasy breed embryo right now. Instead, he was trying to penetrate through space and time. He was going straight to the source of the belief of tens, hundreds, or even tens of millions of living beings that nurtured this embryonic fantasy breed. It was a piece of land hidden behind the nothingness, an abundant supply of food. Just a glance from afar was enough to cause an extremely pressing force to act on his mind. It was enough to scratch his heart and itch his liver. He couldn't wait any longer. To translate it into concrete words, it was roughly, hungry, hungry, hungry. This wasn't a natural reaction from his main body. It also wasn't a problem with the fake body he had recently created. Instead, it was a certain lifelike structure that was struggling to emerge from the thick layer of clouds that still maintained a close connection with the fake body. It was a bit similar to the tree of nothingness, but there was a world of difference between the two in terms of their operating methods and levels. Mother Micah. It didn't seem to be too accurate. Let's use Mother Micah for now. Actually, Luonan had already experienced this sort of thing once before. However, the Mother Micah he created last time had been hacked apart by a certain coward. Now that the remolded Mother Micah had taken shape, that sort of feeling returned. And the current Luonan was different from last night. Not long ago, he had just engaged in a short and high-level confrontation with two extraordinaries. The secret space-time technique he used proved its value in actual combat. The price was the collapse of the fake water vapor body, as well as the clearly lengthened reconstruction period. The fake water vapor body was affected by the high degree of fusion between the structure of the soul cloak and the Mother Micah. The characteristics of the Mother Micah had seeped more and more into the Mother Micah's body. It was to the extent that a simple configuration design was no longer enough to complete the corresponding construction. New fuel was needed. Luonan was hungrier than ever before. Therefore, he threw everything else aside and first dealt with Gui's matter. It wasn't because Gui's life was in danger. It was because Luonan was here that he could smell the fragrance of food. In a certain sense, this was progress. This was because Luonan had already extended a second end from the foundation of the Mother Micah's basic life structure. He had unearthed a driving force that could autonomously maintain this life structure. The apex. Chapter 1063. What is he talking about? Blood Demon rubbed his chin as he pondered. Actually, Luonan really didn't say much. He should have asked what Blood Demon was doing. Before Blood Demon could adjust his thoughts, the scene in the swimming pool made the extraordinaries beside the pool raise their eyebrows. They blinked, they looked pensive, and some simply sneered. Luonan didn't seem to make any obvious movements, but the ox demon, which had been struggling in the pool, went completely rigid. Its body began to expand at a visible rate, and then it began to wither. During this period of time, whether it was the head, the body, or the limbs, they all let out crisp crackling sounds. At first, it sounded a bit like the twisting of joints, but then it connected densely together. It was simply like a firecracker had been lit within the ox demon's body. In addition to its expanding and contracting form, it wouldn't be strange at all if the ox demon were to explode into mincemeat in the next moment. The perspective of a normal person was roughly like this, but a group of extraordinaries certainly wouldn't be this shallow. They could more or less feel the stability and regularity of this seemingly bizarre and intense transformation from beginning to end. It looks like this Mr. Luo has done quite a bit of research on secret orders. Black Lion, who had been ignored twice in a row, was still laughing merrily as he half reclined in his chair. He rubbed his round belly that was mostly exposed, actively participating in topics related to Luonan. Some people ignored him, but others were willing to talk. Star Shaman's thin lips trembled as he replied with a smile, "It's the reverse output of life force. That ox demon no longer has any value in healing. Rather than tormenting itself with repairs, it's better to preserve something more valuable." However, the mental expression of the power of faith and incense interchanges with the energy of the living body. The efficiency is actually quite good? Constance muttered, "The switching structure is truly beautiful. The three who were on the mental side were certainly able to see in much more detail than those who were on the fleshly side. Therefore, Blood Demon and the others didn't want to display their slight skill in front of an expert. They just spoke, having a deeper meaning of chatting. Is it really good to leave him hanging here? Yes, I feel that this child talker is quite pitiful. Blood Demon didn't have the slightest self-awareness of being the instigator of all this. Or perhaps he was more interested in Talker's current state. It's too far ahead, so I don't know what's going on. Say, with my friendship with him, it shouldn't be a problem to ask a few more questions. Hey, you've been doing this for so long and you still haven't found out anything? Xuanhuan simply replied, this is not my style. Connections. In this world, who dares to boast that they have a way and can go all the way? Blood Demon sneered, Sister Luhua, you can't be fooled by that old man. This time Xuanhuan couldn't even be bothered to look at him. It was also at this moment that Talker, who had been silent for a long time under her hand, suddenly shuddered. His eyes widened as he let out a gurgling sound. The flashing electric sparks on his body flickered even more frequently and clashed with each other. The deeper layers of the magnetic field also entered a state of chaos. This was no longer a simple bone and joint problem. Lightning flashed in Xuanhuan's pupils. There were many details that were incompatible with her, but if she were to control it conservatively and simply control the chaotic chi dynamic, don't. Just as Xuanhuan was about to do so, Talker hissed and stopped her. In his widened eyes, his capillaries and ambitions were wildly expanding. Although he was previously seriously injured and looked miserable, his body's condition and level had always been improving. The level of electromagnetic power circulation had already risen to a level that he didn't even dare to imagine. Otherwise, how could he have attracted the attention of so many transcendents? Therefore, Talker had always been quietly learning, experiencing, and memorizing this feeling. He was also trying to make the circulation mode of this power truly imprint itself into his bones. If he were to change it rashly, this opportunity might immediately collapse. No matter what, he couldn't let this opportunity slip through his fingers. He panted heavily and did his best to enunciate his words to express his attitude. My opportunity has arrived. The problem was that the others had a different opinion. Xuanhuan frowned and immediately shook her head. It's just an illusion. I can do it. Talker was in an extremely excited state. Even if the person in front of him was the authority of the transcendents who cultivated in the fleshly side, as well as a great teacher who taught and taught, he couldn't care less. I can definitely. Before he could finish speaking, a voice like a cold wind flowed by his ear. This isn't called an opportunity. The source of the voice was Luonan. That person was still above the center of the pool. He was just slightly distracted. He turned his head and made a conclusion. You can't digest it. Talker was stuck with the appearance of the main character. There was no doubt that he didn't have the confidence to refute this young man who had casually given him the opportunity to climb to the peak. But Talker really wasn't willing to easily give up on such a rare opportunity. His mouth trembled for a long time before he forced himself to speak. Give me a chance. Uncle Luo, I want to try. At a time like this, calling him Uncle Luo was really smooth. Luonan's reaction didn't change at all. In fact, he was just temporarily distracted. Right now, most of his mental energy was still focused on the ingredients. Yes, on Yogue. Luonan had even condensed water vapor to attempt a deeper segmentation foundation. He borrowed the achievements of the School of Fantasy to design a more suitable process for Nyogue's current transformation process. He wanted to see if he could truly turn Nyogue onto the path of a fantasy breed. This could be considered another verification of the structure of the mica. This was a very important matter. It was related to Luonan's main design for a period of time in the future. It was one of the most crucial links to complete the whimsical plan of a new plane simulation. However, Talker's weight wasn't low. In terms of practicality, Talker was even stronger. Of course, Talker's stubborn, greedy, and foolish choice didn't benefit anyone. Luonan decided to temporarily stop Nyogue's transformation and design work to let Talker sober up a bit. So he crooked his finger at Talker. Talker was stunned. He clearly didn't react. Luonan didn't expect him to understand either. Talker, who was about to speak and plead again, suddenly went into a daze in the next second. Then he reached back to touch his throat, completely forgetting the fact that his arm was broken. The pain and the effects of his loss of function caused his arm to freeze midway as he lifted it. However, there was an eye-catching bulge in his throat. There was a clear foreign object wriggling upwards, squeezing into his mouth from his throat. Then it opened up his mouth and swelled out. It was a lump of bright red wriggling flesh. It looked like a creature that had been skinned and dripping with blood. It wasn't just his throat and his mouth. Even the pores on Taker's upper arms and chest seeped out blood-red strands. They wriggled into lines and floated up. They seemed to have a magnetic effect as they blended together with the lump of flesh that had just protruded out of his mouth. They swirled and took shape. Some of the strands directly transformed into slender tentacles. They were completely separated from Taker. They just stuck to the outer layer of the lump of flesh, fluttering in the sea breeze. Chapter 1064. Gu, who was a little further away, Wang Yong, who was at the corner, and Black Lion, who was sitting on the round chair, immediately recognized it. This thing was the bloody sarcoma that was previously used as a key hub for blood transformation. It was first possessed by Luo Nan, then crushed by Gu, and then seeped into Taker's body. Now, it was actually extracted and reconstructed to its original state. Once it was extracted, Taker's energy converged and operated mode immediately collapsed. During this period, Taker did his best to maintain the mode according to his memories, hoping that this mode could be preserved. The problem was that this seemingly profound memory was nothing more than an illusion pieced together by various neurotransmitter stimuli after a series of key details were lost. The so-called mode was just a building made of feathers. It collapsed spontaneously without the slightest disturbance. Taker completely lost his composure when the great road to breaking through the extraordinary door collapsed in front of him. His body suddenly bounced up, wanting to grab the power that had turned into nothingness. A muffled sound rang out. Wan Luhua felt that Taker was too noisy and simply knocked him unconscious. The back of Taker's head smashed onto the table leg and then the ground. He was completely unconscious. As for the bloody sarcoma that had just been extracted, it was still floating stably in midair. It continued to make fine adjustments to its appearance. It was still twitching slightly, just like a demonic creature, or the organ of a living creature. TSK. He must have had a hard time suppressing his ambition all these years. The blood demon used the tip of his foot to poke Taker's waist. Seeing no reaction, he shrugged. It seems that Xianxia has given him too much pressure. He even has a father like that. None of the extraordinaries present were interested in other people's melodramatic dramas. Everyone's attention had already naturally shifted to the bloody sarcoma. The star shaman seemed to be curious as he asked, "What is this thing?" "Oh, my brother Luo is returning it to its rightful owner." The Black Lion jumped up nimbly and shouted, "Brother!" He clapped his fists and laughed loudly. "You guys can't understand how wonderful it feels to regain something you lost." As he spoke, he dashed forward, wanting to grab the lump of flesh that was suspended in the air. Unfortunately, a blood demon stretched out his hand and blocked him without any hesitation. "You said it's yours. Call it. Will it respond?" The Black Lion chuckled. "You're already an adult. Don't make things difficult for it, okay?" The two of them were engaged in a war of words, neither giving way to the other. However, the development of the situation did not change according to their will. Right when their spittle was flying everywhere, the bright red sarcoma hovering above the pool had already begun to float towards the center of the pool. It drew closer to Luo Nan's position. Hey. The Black Lion could not help but push the blood demon's hand away and jump into the pool. Of course, it wouldn't be too unsightly because there was a floating cushion by the side of the pool. Yes, it was in the shape of a white swan for children or women. The Black Lion's fat body stepped on it, still holding the swan's neck. The small floating cushion did not sink to the bottom directly, only shaking endlessly. What the hell? Seeing that the Black Lion was so open, the blood demon could not bear to block him. He allowed the Black Lion to exert force with his feet, stirring up the water and swaying towards the center of the pool. In the beginning, Luo Nan did not pay attention to the reactions of the people by the pool. Most of his thoughts were still on Nyogue's side. Retrieving the bright red sarcoma that caused Taker to go berserk was one thing. But soon he was more or less shocked by the actions of the Black Lion, just like the blood demon. As an extraordinary, the Black Lion might not be omnipotent, but he still had hundreds and thousands of ways to get to the center of the pool. He had to put on a more dignified appearance. The reason why he acted like an ordinary person, to the point of taking the initiative to kill old elves, was probably because he wanted to express an attitude of not being an enemy. This included his previous actions, especially taking the initiative to kill old elves, even if it was just a clone body. Speaking of which, Black Lion's previous actions of killing old elves, aside from indicating the special status of extraordinaries, was equivalent to indirectly confirming that this fellow had an extraordinary relationship with old elves. After all, old elves wasn't truly dead. Wang Yong and Tu Gu had the status of bodyguards. It was their duty, so they actually didn't say anything. Several matters piled up together. Luonan had to look at the Black Lion in a different light. And the more things were like this, the more questions Luonan had. He wanted to obtain answers from the Black Lion. He waved his hand to brush away the beginning of the configuration design and looked straight at the approaching Black Lion. The Black Lion also looked at him. The two looked face to face. From a spectator's perspective, Luonan had the advantage. He was in a high position looking down from above. In addition, the recently formed false body of cloud was blurry. It was hard to grasp the details of Luonan's gaze. The uncertainties were even higher. Luonan himself didn't care who was higher or lower. He just wanted to obtain useful information. The bright red sarcoma arrived a step earlier than the Black Lion. Luonan extended his hand, and the dangling tentacles seemed to have a mind of their own. They wrapped around his half-incorporeal arm. The tentacles maintained a pulsating frequency, and they interacted frequently with Luonan's false body of cloud. It was as if the tentacles could absorb nutrients from within, or perhaps they could take the things stored inside and seep them into the cloud. The Black Lion raised his head to look over. He didn't conceal his feelings of envy at all. He shouted from afar, "Brother Luo, how did you come up with these tricks?" At nearly the same time, Luonan asked him, "When you got this thing, didn't you have an instruction manual over there?" The Black Lion grinned, revealing a mouth full of sharp black and gold teeth. They seemed to flash with light under the dark clouds. "What do you think?" "Which side?" Luonan gave him a glance and shook his head slightly. He wasn't too satisfied with this habitual craftiness. If what followed was this sort of cloudy conversation, then it would be better to seize the moment and settle the matter of Nyogue. Yes, he reflected on himself for a moment. His explanation wasn't clear enough. Luonan pulled back his arm slightly, clasping the still pulsating bright red sarcoma. He extended it out, allowing it to be displayed more clearly before the Black Lion's eyes. "What I'm saying is that even though this reaction furnace is an insincere replica of the wreckage in the entire Earth, there should only be that Li Wei who can produce something like this." Luonan spoke halfway when the gazes of the 7 extraordinaries around him focused on his body. There was a clear increase in temperature. Later on, a few of them even had gazes as scorching as fire, practically igniting his false body of cloud. The swimming pool sunk into a strange silence for a time. It was like a boiling solution in a sealed container. No one knew whether it would silently boil away in the end, or whether it would suddenly explode with a loud bang without warning. The Black Lion sunk into silence at first, maintaining a somewhat stiff smile. But his gaze was extremely lively. He didn't miss a single detail of the pulsating bright red sarcoma in Luonan's palm. Nearly 10 seconds passed. Just as someone was about to lose control and speak up for him, the Black Lion ground his mouth full of golden teeth. He injected a nearly malevolent liveliness into his stiff smiling face. He probably thinks that a headless fly that can't even see the road clearly won't be able to understand the instruction manual. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.